There was a time when a single cast iron pot on the stove could feed a whole family for 2 days straight. Your grandmother knew how to stretch a ham hock, a handful of beans, and whatever greens she had left into something that tasted like love itself. She never needed a recipe book. She never measured a thing. And when she passed, those meals went with her. Tonight, we are bringing them back. Some of these dishes kept entire households alive during the hardest years Black families ever faced. Others were Sunday evening suppers that simmered all afternoon while the house filled with laughter and the smell of cornbread. A few of them you might remember by taste alone because nobody ever wrote the name down. If any of these meals remind you of someone you lost, share their name in the comments because that is how we keep them alive. So hit subscribe and settle in because here are 100 forgotten one-pot soul food meals for Black seniors living alone. Number 25, hot water cornbread pones. Forget the sweet yellow square that bakeries call cornbread now. In 1962, the church kitchen produced hand-shaped pones made by pouring scalding water straight into white stone ground cornmeal with a teaspoon of salt and a heavy finger of bacon grease whisked in. The cornmeal cooked from the heat of the water alone. The deaconesses shaped the warm dough into oblong patties between two cupped palms, leaving the marks of their fingerprints in the sides, and fried them in a flat skillet of pure white lard until the outside cracked open golden and the inside steamed white. They went to the long fellowship table 6 pones to a platter wrapped in a clean flour sack to stay hot. Crisp outside, soft as wet grits inside. They needed nothing but cold butter and the pot liquor from a pot of collard greens. By 1980, almost no Sunday school child in town had ever eaten one. Number 18, neck bone and cabbage pot. Neck bones were the cheapest cut at the butcher counter. In 1970, a pound of pork neck bones cost 19 cents. A head of cabbage cost a dime. Together, they made a meal that could feed a person for 3 days and tasted like someone had been cooking since sunrise. You browned the neck bones in a pot with a little oil, added onions and garlic, then packed the cabbage in on top and poured in enough water to cover half of it. 2 hours of simmering turned the cabbage silky sweet and the neck bones tender enough to fall off the bone. The broth was rich and smoky without a single expensive ingredient. A retired janitor named Willie James Turner in Jackson, Mississippi, made neck bone and cabbage every Wednesday for 12 years. His wife had done all the cooking for 40 years. When she passed in 1968, he didn't know how to boil water. A neighbor named Mrs. Odessa Perry taught him 3 recipes. This was the first one. He said it was the meal that kept him from giving up. Not because it tasted good, which it did, but because making it meant he had a reason to get out of bed on a Wednesday morning. He wasn't cooking for nutrition. He was cooking to prove he was still here. And that is something no meal delivery service and no frozen dinner could ever replace. The act of standing at a stove and feeding yourself is an act of independence. For a generation of Black men who had never cooked a meal in their lives, learning to make neck bone and cabbage wasn't about food. It was about refusing to disappear. Stewed tomatoes and okra came together in one cast iron skillet in less time than it took to set the table. Fresh or canned tomatoes went in first with diced onion and a little bacon grease. Then sliced okra, cut thick, never thin, because thin sliced okra disintegrates and the elders knew the difference. Added in the last 8 minutes so it stayed toothsome and didn't turn to mush. Salt, pepper, and a pinch of cayenne. That was it. Served over white rice, this dish had West African ancestry that predated the American South by centuries. Okra arrived in the Americas through the transatlantic slave trade, carried by enslaved West Africans who understood it as a staple crop and a natural thickener, and it planted itself in Gula, Creole, and Deep South kitchens where it never left. She didn't need a reason to make it. The okra was in season. That was reason enough. And then the coast arrived at the inland table. Deviled crab casserole was low country food, gula and geechee coastal tradition that followed the Great Migration inland, appearing in church kitchens far from the water wherever families had carried the knowledge north. Blue crab meat, picked clean from steamed crabs, was mixed with sauteed onion, mustard, Worcestershire, beaten egg, breadcrumbs, black pepper, and cayenne, then packed into a baking dish or crab shells and baked until brown. The gula geechee people had been cooking crab this way for generations, rooted in West African traditions of cooking shellfish with aromatics and spice. When gula families moved inland through the 1930s and 40s, the dish traveled with them, appearing on fellowship tables in cities that had never seen blue crab before. The knowledge of how to pick a crab clean, patience, a small knife, a practiced hand, left with the women who had grown up doing it. It always was.
String bean casserole with bacon and onions was the kind of dish that looked simple but carried weight. Fresh beans were snapped by hand, tossed into pans with crisp bacon and caramelized onions until the whole kitchen smelled alive. The recipe came before shortcuts, before cans and mixes, when people built flavor from scratch. That first bite was smoky, soft, and sweet, a hymn sung through taste. On church Sundays, this dish always disappeared first. The bowl went around once, twice, and came back empty, a quiet testament to good hands and good memories. The bacon fat gave the beans their soul, coating them in flavor that whispered of long days in the kitchen and even longer days in the fields. A little sugar balanced the salt, a trick passed down by women who knew that even vegetables deserved indulgence. It was a dish that spoke softly but stayed with you, proof that the simplest foods could feel the richest.
If the punch was what the children came for, the pig feet stew was what the old folks would not leave without. The feet that butchers threw into the scrap bin in the 1930s and 40s were hauled home for pennies by women who understood what slow heat and vinegar could do to cartilage. Scrubbed, split, and simmered for hours with potatoes, onions, bay leaves, and a heavy pour of apple cider vinegar, the connective tissue broke down until the broth turned thick as gravy. The meat pulled away in silky ribbons, and the potatoes absorbed the gelatin-rich stock until they barely held on a spoon. At church homecomings in the rural South, annual gatherings that brought families back to the congregations their grandparents had founded, this stew sat next to fancier dishes and outlasted everyone. The generation that understood what a pig foot could become was the same generation that never came home from the hospital. Number 19, ham and red-eye gravy, a thick slice of country ham fried in a dry skillet until the fat rendered out and the lean edges went dark and tight. Then a pour of black coffee straight into the hot pan. That was the entire recipe. The coffee hit the ham drippings and the rendered grease and turned into a thin, bitter, deeply salty gravy, the color of a red clay road after rain. The name came from the way the fat pooled in the center of the pan and looked like a bloodshot eye staring up at the ceiling. This supper goes back to the early 1800s, and in the rural Black South, it lasted as a common weeknight meal through the mid-20th century. Country ham was cheap because it was preserved, not fresh. Salt cured and smoked over hickory, it could hang in a smokehouse for months without spoiling. A single thick slice fried properly could feed a grown man, and the red-eye gravy stretched it further when you poured it over rice or used a biscuit to sop up every last drop from the plate. Andrew Jackson is said to have demanded red-eye gravy from his cook at the Hermitage, and the dish was common in both black and white Southern kitchens for generations after that. But country ham stopped being cheap. By the 1990s, it became a specialty product, dry cured and aged, selling for $12 to $15 a pound at gourmet shops and mail order catalogs. The gravy followed the ham into extinction. Nobody makes red-eye gravy with store-bought deli ham because it does not work. The chemistry is wrong, the smoke is missing, the grease does not render the same way, and so the dish died with the ham that made it possible. Number 18, pepper vinegar. On nearly every table in the rural Black South, next to the salt shaker, sat a glass bottle filled with hot peppers and white vinegar. It showed up in community cookbooks, not as a recipe, but as a given, the way flour might appear. You pack small hot peppers into a bottle, covered them with vinegar, and let it sit on the counter for a week. The vinegar turned amber, then orange. A few drops went on collard greens, black-eyed peas, turnip greens, and anything else that needed heat. Nobody bought hot sauce when the pepper bottle was already there. When you ran low, you just added more vinegar and let it sit another few days. The bottle was never empty and never finished. When Tabasco and Louisiana brand hot sauce became cheap and everywhere in the 1970s, the homemade bottle slowly disappeared from the table. Number 20, small turtles under 4 inches. Snapping turtle and pond turtle were honest food in many Southern Black households, caught from the creek and cooked into stews and fried turtle that stretched a week's eating. Children kept the tiny ones in dime store bowls, and the small turtle trade boomed in pet shops nationwide. The trouble was salmonella. The little turtles carried it on their shells, and outbreaks of it kept landing children in hospitals across the country. In 1975, the FDA banned the sale of any turtle with a shell under 4 inches long, the size that ended up in a child's hands and then a child's mouth. The rule did not touch the big turtles cooked for the pot, but it gutted the trade in the small ones and reshaped how families could keep them. A creature that had fed and entertained folks for generations got its smallest version pulled from every shelf to stop the spread of a kitchen sickness. Number 17, tomato sandwich. A ripe tomato, 2 slices of white bread, and mayonnaise. That was the summer meal that showed up on every porch in the Black South from June through September. You sliced the tomato thick, spread the mayonnaise heavy, and ate it over the sink because the juice ran down your arm. The tomato had to be garden grown. A store-bought tomato in January was not the same sandwich. A single plant gave enough tomatoes for a family to eat these every day for a month. The bread cost a dime. The mayonnaise lasted all summer. The tomato was free. For families who grew their own food, this was the taste of abundance in a life that did not offer much of it. A woman did not need to announce that summer had arrived. She just set a plate of tomato sandwiches on the table. That was enough. Number 8, salmon croquettes with hot grits. No single breakfast shows up in more 1960s soul food memoirs than a plate of crisp salmon croquettes alongside a bowl of stone ground grits. The whole meal started with a 15-ounce can of pink salmon, which cost 49 cents at a neighborhood grocery in 1965 and went a long way. The fish came out of the can with the bones still in, and Black grandmothers in Detroit, Chicago, and Birmingham crushed those soft bones right into the mix for the calcium. The salmon got mashed with a beaten egg, a half cup of yellow cornmeal, a chopped onion, and a little of the juice from the can to hold everything together. Patted into flat rounds and dropped into hot grease, The croquettes turned deep golden in about 3 minutes aside. A bowl of grits went on the plate next to them, and a spoon of bacon drippings melted down through the grits. The whole plate cost less than 30 cents to put together. Number 8, sweet potato pie. The bag of sweet potatoes from the produce aisle cost under $1 in 1986, and one 5-pound sack baked off 2 whole pies for the Sunday supper table. The potatoes roasted in the oven for an hour until the skins blistered and the flesh inside turned to soft orange custard with a sweet smell that carried into the living room. The peels slid off in your fingers. The pulp went into a mixing bowl with brown sugar, evaporated milk, 2 eggs, a heavy shake of cinnamon and nutmeg, a teaspoon of vanilla extract, and a pat of melted butter. Whipped smooth with a hand mixer, the filling poured into a frozen pie shell from the freezer case. 45 minutes in a moderate oven set the custard and browned the top. A pie cost under $2 to make and served 8 at the church fellowship hall. Sweet potato pie was the dessert that ended every Sunday supper. Number 4, Easter coconut cake. The hours of hand grating fresh coconut that enslaved women performed in plantation kitchens was forced labor disguised as domesticity. They cracked whole coconuts and grated the meat by hand, a process that could take hours for a single cake. But when those same women baked coconut cake for their own families after freedom, that labor became something else entirely. An act of love so powerful, it defined Easter for generations. The original coconut cake required 2 to 3 whole coconuts. In the 1880s, a single coconut cost 10 to 15 cents. The white coconut connected symbolically to Easter's themes of purity and resurrection. Edna Lewis, born in Freetown, Virginia, a community founded by freed slaves, wrote that coconut cake was one of the most famous desserts her community baked. Abby Fisher's 1881 cookbook included a coconut cake recipe, one of the oldest known, published by an African-American author. By the mid-20th century, bag-sweetened flake coconut replaced the fresh. The cake lost its texture, its labor, and its meaning in the same generation. The women in your family who could crack a coconut and turn it into Easter are nearly all gone. What replaced them came in a plastic bag. Thanksgiving was not about the turkey, it was about the gravy, and the gravy belonged to whoever held the giblet bag. Inside that small pouch tucked into the bird's cavity sat the liver, heart, gizzard, and neck, and in Black households, those parts did not get discarded. They were boiled with onion and celery until the neck meat fell off the bone and the organs could be chopped fine. The giblets went into pan drippings, thickened with flour and stretched with broth until the gravy turned dark and rich, flecked with tiny pieces of liver and heart that gave it a depth no plain drippings could match. Ladled over cornbread dressing, it was the soul of the holiday plate. The woman who made it was usually the eldest in the kitchen, and she did not share the stove. She tasted with her own spoon. She adjusted the salt without asking. When she passed the duty down, it meant she trusted your hands. In some families, that handoff never happened. The gravy just stopped being right. Number 22, Sister Pearl May's 3-layer congealed salad. Most of these forgotten dishes carry no name with them anymore, just the memory of a Pyrex pan. But in fellowship halls across the rural South, the 3-layer congealed salad belonged to one archetype that existed in every congregation, the Sister Pearl May. Every Black church had one. She sat 4th pew on the left, ran the women's auxiliary, and brought the same Pyrex 9x13 pan every 5th Sunday from about 1959 to 1971. The first layer was lime jello set with crushed pineapple and grated carrot. She poured that on Friday night. Saturday morning, She poured the middle layer, a tinted cream cheese and mayonnaise mixture stretched with a packet of Knox plain gelatin, white as a hymnal page. By Saturday afternoon, she added the top cherry jello suspended with halved maraschinos and crushed pecans from her own backyard tree. The whole thing set Sunday morning before the sunrise service. She carried it across 2 pews on a folded dish towel, never letting it tip. The Sister Pearl May of any given congregation in 1965 was usually a widow in her 60s, often a retired school cook, almost always the woman who counted offering envelopes on Monday morning. The salad was hers because the 4-shelf icebox in her kitchen was the only one in walking distance with that much vertical space. After integration, after the supermarkets came and the Pyrex set in her cupboard chipped past use, the recipe traveled nowhere. Younger women called it old-fashioned. The Sister Pearl May of each church passed on, and the 3-layer congealed salad with her. Few people talk about how much culinary memory in the Black church walked out the door wrapped in a dish towel. A whole strata of Sunday food lived in one woman's icebox, and when she went home, the layered salad went with her. Number 23, Brunswick stew. This was the meal that fed entire churches on a Sunday afternoon. The original came out of Virginia in the 1820s, and by the time it reached Black communities across the Deep South, it had become something different, something better. A senior would take whatever meat was on sale, usually chicken thighs at 39 cents a pound, and drop them in a pot with canned tomatoes, corn, lima beans, potatoes, and a splash of vinegar. 2 hours of simmering and the chicken fell apart into a thick, smoky broth. One batch made enough for 4 days. A woman named Lucille Harper in Savannah, Georgia, made Brunswick stew every other week for 14 years after her husband died in 1969. She never measured a thing. She said your hands know what a pot needs if you've been cooking long enough. The truth is, it belonged to whoever needed a cheap meal that tasted like someone loved them. There was a kind of supper that didn't announce itself. No single dish you could point to, just 2 things cooking side by side that together made a meal. Hot water cornbread, rounds pressed by hand from cornmeal, salt and boiling water, laid into a cast iron skillet in a slick of hot grease and fried until they developed a crust you could tap with your finger. On the other eye of the stove, a pot of field peas with a smoked ham hock, cooked until the peas went soft and the broth turned silky. Together they were supper. The cornbread was for sopping. The field peas were for filling. She made it without measuring the cornmeal or timing the peas, because the hands knew the proportions and the eyes knew when the peas were done. The last time that supper appeared on this earth with all its authority was the last time those hands were in that kitchen. But years before that rice pot reached its full simmer, the cornbread dressing had already claimed the big roasting pan and the place of honor on the harvest table. Cornbread dressing was baked in its own pan, made from crumbled cornbread, mixed with biscuit crumbs, sautéed celery and onion, sage, poultry seasoning, eggs, black pepper, and enough chicken broth to make the mixture wet but not soupy. The ratio of cornbread to biscuit was the secret variable. Some women used all cornbread, some mixed it half and half, and neither group believed the other was doing it correctly. In Black Southern church kitchens, through the 1950s, dressing appeared at Thanksgiving, Christmas, Homecoming Sunday, and any gathering significant enough to warrant a full spread. The woman who made the dressing held a specific position at the table. The pan is gone. The position went with her. Crackling cornbread arrived in cast iron and smelled like November. Cracklings, the crisp, rendered pieces of pork skin and fat left after lard making, were folded into standard cornbread batter before the skillet went into the oven. The cracklings distributed through the bread as it baked, leaving pockets of salty, porky richness in every slice, the skin slightly chewier where it had softened in the batter. Lard rendering from hog killing was an annual fall event in rural black southern communities through the mid-20th century, and cracklings were its immediate byproduct, available in November when the weather turned cold enough for the process. The practice of incorporating rendered pork fat into grain-based breads reaches back into West African cooking traditions, where animal fat has long enriched otherwise plain starches. By the 1970s, as home hog killing faded, cracklings became harder to find fresh. The cornbread that replaced crackling cornbread was easier and missing something it could not name.
Fried whiting fish was the heartbeat of summer services and Sunday fundraisers, popping and hissing in cast-iron skillets behind the church. The fish was dredged in seasoned cornmeal, fried until golden and crisp, the edges curling slightly as they hit the hot oil. The sound alone could bring a crowd. Children ran back and forth with paper plates while elders fanned themselves with church programs, laughing and waiting for the next batch. You could taste the salt of the sea, the crunch of tradition, the work of hands that knew how to stretch a meal. Fried whiting was affordable, filling, and familiar, something every soul food cook could trust to come out right. Sometimes it was served with white bread and mustard, sometimes with coleslaw and hush puppies, but always with pride. It was food that traveled well, from kitchen to fellowship hall to picnic table, and it never lost its magic. Every piece was a little miracle of patience and grease, the taste of good company and good faith.
It was always made the night before and always served cold. Cucumber and onion salad, sharp with white vinegar, sweet with a spoonful of sugar, clear as water in the bowl. The cucumbers came from the church garden or a deacon's backyard, thick-skinned, seedy, the kind you peeled and sliced by hand. White onions, cut into rings so thin you could see through them, went in with the cucumbers, and the whole thing soaked overnight in vinegar, water, sugar, salt, and cracked pepper. By morning, the cucumbers had gone translucent and the onions had lost their bite. The salad traveled in the same Tupperware every Sunday, snapped shut because vinegar would ruin a car seat in minutes. Nobody talked about it, but everybody finished it. When the church gardens dried up and the plots turned to lawn, the cucumbers came from the store, too watery, too thin-skinned, soft by noon. The Tupperware is still in the cabinet, the garden is not. Number 14, grits and grillades. Grillades are thin medallions of beef or pork, pounded flat with the back of a heavy knife, browned hard in a skillet, then smothered in a dark, roux-based gravy built with tomatoes, onions, celery, and bell pepper, served over a mound of slow-cooked stone-ground grits. The dish traces back to the Creole kitchens of New Orleans, where black women cooked for French and Spanish households in the 1700s and 1800s and turned the cheapest cuts of meat into the richest meals on the table. The word grillades comes from the French word griller, meaning to grill, but the dish was never grilled. It was always a skillet dish and always a poor cook's triumph. The cheapest cuts of meat worked best because the long smothering in that dark gravy broke down every tough fiber until the meat fell apart at the touch of a fork. Round steak, shoulder cuts, anything a butcher would practically give away. In black neighborhoods across Louisiana, the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and the port cities of Mobile and Biloxi, grillades and grits was a supper that could feed 8 people from one skillet and one pot of grits. The gravy was the secret, a dark roux stirred over steady heat until it turned the color of milk chocolate, then the tomatoes and the Holy Trinity built on top, then the brown meat laid back, into braise until it surrendered. The whole thing took patience and knowledge and one good skillet. Creole restaurants in New Orleans today serve grillades at brunch for $20 a plate. The families who invented the dish cannot afford to eat it at those prices, and the knowledge it takes to build a proper roux, the instinct for how long to smother, the understanding of which cuts to ask for at the counter, that has thinned out with each passing generation. The grillades went from a Tuesday night supper to a Sunday occasion to a restaurant curiosity that tourists order without knowing its origins. The pattern is always the same. A dish starts at the bottom of the food chain. It gets invented by people who cannot afford anything else, and it works. It feeds. It holds a family together around a table on a Wednesday night when there is nothing in the house but determination and a cast iron pan. Then time passes, the cheap ingredients get expensive, the knowledge gets buried. The next generation moves to a city where nobody teaches them how to build a roux or render fat back or judge the heat of a skillet by holding a hand 3 inches above the iron. And somewhere between the old kitchen and the new apartment, the skillet gets pushed to the back of the cabinet and replaced by a microwave. Nobody decides to stop cooking these meals, they just stop knowing how. And once the knowing is gone, the food follows. Number 14, neck bone perlou. Along the coast of South Carolina and Georgia, in the Low Country where African, Caribbean, and Southern food traditions mixed for 300 years, rice was the center of the plate. Perlou was the dish that made the least amount of meat feed the most people. Smoked pork neck bones were simmered in water with onion, garlic, and bay leaf until the broth was rich and the meat was tender enough to pull clean. Then raw rice was stirred directly into the pot and the lid sealed. The rice absorbed every trace of smoke and fat and salt. The word perlou likely comes from pilau, a technique that traveled through Persia and West Africa before arriving in the Low Country with enslaved people who already knew how to cook rice better than anyone on the continent. 2 or 3 neck bones, which cost almost nothing because nobody with money wanted them, could produce enough perlou to fill 8 or 10 plates. A single pot, 1 burner, rice that cooked in its own sauce. The Gula Geechee communities along the Sea Islands kept this tradition alive longer than most. But by the 1990s, the old-style perlou was fading. Neck bones cost more now. The young people moved to Atlanta and Charlotte, and the rice that once grew in those same coastal fields has not been commercially harvested in South Carolina since the early 1900s. The old community cookbooks from Beaufort and Charleston recorded what the hands already knew: a cup of rice per person, enough broth to cover by 1 inch, and the patience to leave the lid alone. Number 15, coltsfoot. Like comfrey, this was a plant the old folks kept for the cough that would not quit. They brewed the leaves into a tea or boiled them down into a syrup, and they swore by it through every winter, a remedy carried over from the old country and kept alive in southern kitchens. The name itself promised healing for the chest, but coltsfoot belongs to the same toxic family as comfrey, loaded with the same pyrrolizidine alkaloids that quietly destroy the liver and have been linked to cancer. A tea taken for comfort was scarring an organ with every cup. The FDA flagged it among the dangerous botanicals and pushed it out of dietary supplements, warning the public against the very cure their grandmothers had trusted. A plant kept for generations to soothe a sick child turned out to carry a slow and hidden harm, restricted once the science named what it really did. Number 11, rice and gravy. Cooked rice, pan drippings, and flour. The drippings came from whatever meat had been cooked that week. You scraped the bottom of the skillet, sprinkled in flour, stirred until it browned, then added water and let it thicken into a dark gravy that covered the rice like a blanket. Rice and gravy was not a recipe anyone taught. It was a reflex. When the meat was gone but the drippings remained, you made gravy. A cup of rice cost pennies. The drippings were already paid for. This meal appeared on more black dinner tables than any single recipe ever published. It showed up 5 nights a week in households where the grocery money ran out before the week did. Every grandmother who served it said the same thing. Eat your rice. There is nothing else tonight. That sentence was not an apology. It was a fact delivered with the same dignity as grace before a feast. Number 12, liver mush, slices with hot coffee. Liver mush was the cheap North Carolina cousin of scrapple, and in black households across the Piedmont, it carried the cold months from October through to March. The loaf came wrapped in waxy butcher paper for about 30 cents a pound in 1963, less than half the price of any cured pork on the same counter. It was ground pork liver mixed with stone ground cornmeal, dried sage, and plenty of black pepper, then chilled solid in a loaf pan overnight until it cut clean. 2 cold slices hit a dry pan first thing in the morning and crisped up dark brown on both sides in under 5 minutes. No extra grease needed. A thick slice on a piece of light bread with a smear of yellow mustard fed a grown man straight through to his lunch break, and the mug of strong black coffee beside it finished the meal off. Number 1, banana pudding. The last dish on this list was the dessert that closed every Sunday supper and every church fellowship hall potluck across the South in the 1980s. A box of Jell-O vanilla pudding mix cost 30 cents. A sleeve of Nilla wafers ran $1.20, 4 ripe bananas, a quarter apiece, and a small tub of Cool Whip topped the whole thing off. The pudding whipped together with cold milk in 2 minutes flat. Layers of wafer, sliced banana, pudding, repeat in a glass casserole dish. Cool Whip spread thick across the top, then a final ring of crushed wafer crumbs around the edge for color. Chilled for 2 hours in the icebox until the wafers softened into cake and the bananas perfumed every spoonful. A pan cost under $3 and fed 12 at the church supper. Banana pudding was the sweet ending that said the week was done. Number 11, roast leg of lamb. Black preachers drew a direct line from the Israelites, marking their doors with lamb's blood, to black families surviving slavery and Jim Crow. If you sat in that pew, you understood. Easter lamb was not just dinner. It was theology you could taste on your own plate. In rural Southern communities through the mid-20th century, many black families kept small flocks of sheep. Edna Lewis, born in Freetown, Virginia, a farming community founded by freed slaves after the Civil War, described spring sheep shearing as a community event. The lamb would be roasted whole or as a leg for Easter Sunday. A whole leg of lamb averaged $4.50 per pound in 2000. It now runs $9 to $12, putting a 7-pound leg at $63 to $84. United States lamb production has declined roughly 85% since the 1940s, from over 56 million sheep to under 5 million. As black families urbanized and moved north, access to fresh lamb declined. Ham took over as the default Easter meat. The lamb and its sermon disappeared together. Time equals 1 second / greater than the smell of pork chops. Frying on a Saturday could pull you in from 3 houses down. Thin bone-in chops seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, fried in Crisco until the crust turned dark gold and the edges curled crisp. The sandwich was simple. 1 chop laid flat on soft white bread, hit with hot sauce or mustard, topped with another slice, wrapped tight in wax paper. You ate it with your hands, the bread soaking up grease until it went translucent but never fell apart. Back then, fried pork chop sandwiches traveled to work in lunch pails, on road trips in paper bags, to the park where the grill was for show, but the real food came from the kitchen. Your father ate them cold at midnight, standing at the counter. Your mother made a dozen at a time. The chops cost less than $1 for a whole pack. The bread cost $0.25. The meal held a family together on nothing, and it tasted like everything. Now, if the pork chop sandwich was Saturday, number 18, brown sugar snap beans. Pole beans grew up the corn rows in every black family garden through the late 1960s, and on Sunday mornings, the church mothers brought a 5-quart pot of snap beans that had been cooking since 6 a.m. The beans simmered with a smoked ham hock, a strip of fatback, 1 whole yellow onion, and 2 heaping spoons of light brown sugar. The brown sugar was the part nobody confesses to anymore. It cut the salt from the ham hock and turned the pot liquor a deep mahogany. Ladled over hot pones, at the long table, the bean liquor was as prized as the beans themselves. By the 1990s, brown sugar and greens was called country, and the recipe quietly went. / greater than number 12, cornmeal mush pot. This was the meal at the very bottom of the ladder. When there was nothing else in the cupboard, there was cornmeal. A cup of cornmeal, 3 cups of water, a pinch of salt. You stirred it over heat until it thickened into a porridge, and that was supper. If you had bacon grease, you stirred in a spoonful. If you had a little sugar, you sprinkled it on top. If you had nothing, you ate it plain. A 5-pound bag of cornmeal cost 39 cents in 1958 and lasted a single person 3 weeks. A retired school teacher in Tuskegee told her students in 1974 that cornmeal mush saved her family during the winter of 1934. 7 people, 1 bag of cornmeal, 6 weeks. She said they ate it morning and night and never complained, because complaining meant you did not understand how close you were to eating nothing at all. Cornmeal mush didn't taste like love. It tasted like another day. Skillet pork and sweet potatoes was the kind of supper that turned 2 cheap ingredients into something that looked and tasted deliberate. Pork shoulder pieces or country-style ribs cut into chunks and browned in lard until the edges crisped, then sweet potatoes peeled and diced into the same skillet, cubes small so they'd cook fast, with a splash of water to steam everything through, a lid dropped on, and the heat kept at medium for 12 minutes until the potatoes were fork tender and had soaked up every bit of pork fat in the pan. The combination was older than the skillet itself. West African food traditions paired yams and pork centuries before the American South claimed the combination as its own, and the sweet potato, botanically distinct from the yam but occupying the same cultural space in black kitchens, brought natural sweetness that needed no sugar added. A little hot sauce on the side, maybe a wedge of cornbread if there was time. Done. Deviled eggs went to church under a different name. You could not put the word devil on the fellowship table, not in those kitchens, not in those congregations, so they were called dressed eggs or salad eggs or simply the eggs, and everyone understood exactly what they were. The preparation was precise. Hard-boiled eggs, halved lengthwise, yolks mashed with mustard, mayonnaise, sweet pickle relish, salt, and a touch of vinegar, then piped the spoon back into the whites and dusted with paprika. The paprika was mandatory, not for flavor, but for finish, the visual signal that the eggs were complete. Church, women who made them brought a specific deviled egg plate, an oval platter with molded indentations for each half, which kept them from sliding and which was understood to belong to the woman who owned it the way a cast iron skillet belongs to whoever seasoned it. These plates are in estate sales now, the eggs long gone from the tables they once anchored.
Collard greens with ham hocks were the backbone of every potluck table, steaming and savory, filling the room with their deep, earthy scent. The greens were washed over and over in cool water. not just to clean them, but to honor the work that went into growing them. The ham hocks simmered for hours until the meat softened, sending flavor through every leaf. The pot itself would tremble gently on the stove as if humming along with the gospel songs on the radio. Grandmothers knew the timing by feel, not clocks, tasting the broth and nodding when it was ready. A good pot of greens could stretch a meal, feed a family, and feed a crowd all the same. When carried into the church basement, the steam fogged the lids of the serving trays, and everyone nearby could smell the salt, the smoke, and the love. These greens told stories about sharecropping days, about Sunday rest after long weeks, about making something nourishing from whatever you had. Nothing on that table ever felt more alive. Even if money was tight, you could always count on greens to show up, hearty and humble, served with hot sauce and pride.
The name came from Laugh-In, but the cake belonged to the church. Sock It to Me cake appeared in the mid-1960s when Duncan Hines printed the recipe on their butter cake mix box, and within a year, it was on every Fellowship Hall dessert table from Memphis to Baltimore. The genius was the cinnamon pecan ribbon through the center, brown sugar, chopped pecans, and cinnamon swirled into the batter before baking, so when you cut a slice, the dark veins spiraled through the golden crumb. Sour cream made it dense and moist. The glaze was powdered sugar and milk poured thin so it dripped down the bundt pan ridges. The women who brought this cake knew exactly how long to let it cool before glazing. Too soon, and the glaze disappeared. Too late, and it sat like paint. That timing was never in the recipe. By the 2000s, boxed mixes changed their formulas, the cake stopped rising right, and the women who knew how to adjust were already gone. Number 24, scrambled eggs with tomatoes and onions. A can of stewed tomatoes, half an onion chopped rough, and 3 or 4 eggs beaten with a fork. The tomatoes went in first with the onion, cooked down in a skillet until most of the liquid burned off. Then the eggs got folded in and scrambled wet so the curds turned orange and soft. Eaten straight from the pan with a piece of cornbread or a cold biscuit left over from the morning. In rural Alabama and Mississippi, this was a full supper, not a breakfast. The eggs came from the yard. The tomatoes came from the pantry shelf. The onion came from the garden row behind the house. Nobody wrote a recipe for it because nobody thought it qualified as real cooking. It was just what you did when the icebox was bare and the store was closed. Number 21, sweet potato pone. This was not sweet potato pie and not sweet potato casserole. Sweet potato pone was older than both. The recipe appeared in handwritten church cookbooks from the 1880s across Georgia, Alabama, and the Mississippi Delta. Raw sweet potatoes were grated by hand on a box grater, mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and spices, then baked slow until the top cracked and the center set dense and dark, almost like a pudding. It took close to 2 hours in a wood-fired oven. The texture was heavy, somewhere between cornbread and fudge, and it was eaten warm with nothing on top. Grating enough sweet potato for a family of 8 meant raw knuckles and sore arms. When canned sweet potatoes and pre-made pie crust showed up in stores in the 1950s, sweet potato pone was one of the first recipes to drop out of the rotation. Nobody noticed until the hands that grated them were gone. Number 17, lead glazed earthenware. The handsome clay pots and bean crocks that came up from Mexico and out of old country kilns carried a danger nobody could see. That bright glassy glaze got its shine from lead, and when it was not fired hot enough, the lead never fully fused. Pour something acidic into one, a pot of beans, a stew with tomato, a jug of tea left to sit, and the lead leached straight into the food. Families used these vessels for years, prizing them for their looks, never knowing they were seasoning every meal with poison. Lead does its worst damage to children and the unborn, dulling the mind in ways that never come back. The FDA moved to block it, prohibiting any cookware that leaches lead from being sold or imported, and ordering tainted pottery seized at the border. A pot that looked like heritage and beauty turned out to be a slow poison pulled from the shelves to protect the youngest at the table. Number 24, cornbread dressing with onion. Leftover cornbread and onion and broth from whatever bones were in the pot. That was the dressing that appeared on every holiday table in every black church basement from Mobile to Memphis. You crumbled the stale cornbread, diced the onion fine, poured the broth over everything, and baked it until the top turned golden. The cornbread dressing was never the main dish, but it was the dish that told you who made it. Every grandmother's version was different. The onion to cornbread ratio was a signature, like a woman's handwriting. At Thanksgiving in a 2-room shotgun house, the turkey might be small, but the dressing pan was always full. The bread was from yesterday, the broth was from the bones, the onion was from the garden. Nothing was purchased, everything was transformed. Or number 13, hog jowl with black coffee. A single thin slice of smoked hog jowl with a cup of strong black coffee was the breakfast of men who had to be at the mill or the field by sunrise. The jowl came from the cheek of the pig and cost almost nothing because most white grocery stores did not want it. In a soul food household, it was treasured. One slice in a hot pan rendered into smoky brown grease and curled up crisp at the edges. The coffee, boiled in a battered enamel pot and poured strong enough to stand a spoon in, washed it down. There was no toast, no eggs, no fuss. Just meat, fat, and heat in the belly, with the smell of wood smoke still in the cured pork. Black families in the Carolinas and Tennessee mountain country ate this 6 days a week through the winter, and grandmothers swore it was what kept the men working past sundown without sitting down once. Number 23, fried bologna sandwiches. And by 1983, when generic store brand bologna sat at under $1 a pound and Oscar Mayer ran closer to $2, black mothers across the Midwest had perfected the art of frying both. A thick slice went into a hot grease pan with a small slit cut into each side to keep it from puffing up like a balloon. The edges crisp to brown, the middle stayed soft, and the smell filled the kitchen in under a minute. 2 slices of cheap white bread, a smear of French's yellow mustard, a slice of American cheese if payday had hit, and a leaf of iceberg lettuce if you had it. This was the after-school plate for the latchkey kids of Detroit and Cleveland whose mothers worked second shift at the hospital or the post office. The sandwich was assembled in 3 minutes flat and eaten in front of cartoons at 4:30 in the afternoon. A small glass of Kool-Aid washed it down. Fried bologna was the snack that became supper when the paycheck was 3 days late. Number 1, caramel cake. Caramel cake was the showstopper, the cake that ended Easter dinner with a standing ovation or a silent nod that meant the same thing. A golden butter cake layered and covered with burnt sugar caramel icing that required extraordinary skill to execute. The icing is a cooked fudge made from brown sugar, butter, and milk. 3 cups of brown sugar, 1 cup of butter, 3/4 cup of milk. It must be brought to exactly 236 to 238 degrees, the softball stage. Get it wrong by a few degrees and you end up with a runny glaze or rock hard candy. Then you beat it by hand for 15 to 20 minutes while it cools until it reaches a smooth, spreadable consistency. No margin for error. The kind of patience and precision that only came from a lifetime of practice. Southern food historian Ann Byrne has documented caramel cake as one of the most technically demanding recipes in the Southern baking tradition, and the most frequently lost. She kept them in a bag in the freezer, yellow and curled. And when you were young, they frightened you. But your grandmother saw something in chicken feet the grocery store did not. Collagen, gelatin, a broth so rich it set like jelly when it cooled. The feet were scrubbed, outer skin peeled after a blanch, nails clipped with kitchen shears. Into the pot with onion, celery, garlic, and bay leaves. Hours later, the liquor had turned golden and thick, the feet broken down until tiny bones pulled from tender meat. In the Caribbean and across West Africa, chicken foot soup was healing food, given to the sick and the newly delivered mother. Black families in the South carried that belief into the 1970s. When supermarkets replaced corner butcher shops, the stew disappeared from most kitchens. The women who made it swore the broth could fix anything. They are gone now. Nobody has found a replacement. Number 29, Chow Chow Relish. By 1963, every fellowship hall in the rural South had at least 3 jars of homemade chow chow lined up next to the cornbread platter, each one labeled with masking tape and a different woman's last name. The church mothers chopped end-of-season green tomatoes, white cabbage, sweet onion, and red bell pepper from their own backyard rows, then packed it all into pint jars with brine made from cider vinegar, white sugar, yellow mustard seed, celery seed, and a thumb of turmeric. The pot simmered on the back of the stove all afternoon. It cured for 3 weeks in a back pantry shelf before it ever met a plate of pintos. A spoonful of bright yellow chow chow on top of hot beans and a wedge of cornbread was Tuesday supper at home and Sunday dinner at church. The mason jars went home empty and washed. Almost nobody under 60 has tasted real homemade chow chow since 1985. Number 13, chitlin stew. Most people under 50 have never seen a chitlin, let alone cooked one. But for black seniors who grew up in the rural South, chitlins weren't a novelty. They were a necessity. Chitterlings, the small intestines of the hog, required hours of cleaning and careful preparation. But once they were clean, a senior could simmer them in a pot with onions, garlic, vinegar, red pepper flakes, and potatoes for 3 to 4 hours until they turned tender and the broth became something rich and complex. The vinegar cut the heaviness. The potatoes thickened it into a proper stew. In the 1950s and 1960s, chitlins were nearly free. Butchers gave them away or sold them for pennies because white customers wouldn't touch them. Black families took what others discarded and turned it into a tradition. A retired sharecropper's wife in Selma, Alabama, made chitlin stew every other Saturday from November through February. She said you could tell how old a woman was by how fast she cleaned a bucket of chitlins. This wasn't a meal people chose for flavor alone. They chose it because it connected them to every winter their mothers and grandmothers had survived. The cleaning was the ritual. The cooking was the ceremony. The eating was the proof that another season had been endured. For seniors living alone, that proof mattered more than any restaurant meal ever could. It said you still had the patience, the knowledge, and the will to do something difficult, and you did it for yourself. Time equals 1 second. Lima bean and smoked meat stew was the supper that smelled like it had been cooking since morning, even when she hadn't started it until 5. A smoked neck bone or a single ham hock piece dropped into a pot of canned lima beans. She kept 6 cans in the pantry at all times because life was uncertain. With diced onion, a bay leaf, and enough water to cover, then brought to a boil and simmered hard for 20 minutes while the smoke from the bone dissolved into the broth. The beans went creamy without being broken, thick without being pasty, and the pot liquor left behind was something you didn't pour down the drain. You sopped it with bread. You crumbled cornbread into it. Lima beans had their own deep history in black kitchens. Introduced to the Americas through indigenous and African Agricultural exchange, they were a pantry staple long before the Great Migration carried them north into Chicago and Detroit apartments where a single can could anchor a whole meal. Stewed chicken and rice was started the morning of service, sometimes the night before. The bird, a whole hen, not a fryer, because a hen's age meant fat and flavor a young chicken couldn't give, went into the pot with onion, celery, garlic, bay leaves, black pepper, and water to cover. It simmered on low for 2 hours minimum, never boiled hard, because hard boiling makes the meat stringy and clouds the broth. When the meat came off the bone in clean pieces, the broth was strained, the rice stirred and raw to cook in the liquid until it absorbed every bit of flavor from the long simmer. Salt was added last, always last, because the broth concentrated as it cooked. This was the dish that fed the largest number for the least cost. A whole hen stretched to 12 when the rice absorbed the broth. In church kitchens from Georgia to Illinois through the 1950s, it appeared, when the congregation was large and the budget was not. The women who made it are gone. The knowledge of how slowly to go went with them.
Barbecue meatballs were the kind of dish that drew laughter before the first bite. Sticky, sweet, and warm, they traveled in covered pans from kitchens to church halls, ready to be passed around on toothpicks while the children hovered close. They were coated in a thick, tangy sauce made from ketchup, sugar, and love, bubbling on the stove until it clung to every inch of meat. Each bite was tender, smoky, and comforting, like a backyard memory folded into Sunday supper. At potlucks, they came out first, the unofficial welcome before the main course. The elders teased each other about who made them best, and the kids cleaned the tray long before the second round of prayers. It was food meant for sharing, for talking, for laughing, for feeding hearts as much as stomachs. The sauce left a shine on every plate and a sweetness on every smile. It was not about perfection. Some came out too soft, others too sticky, but about joy, pure and simple. They were made in the same pans that cooked Sunday dinners for generations, pans seasoned by years of care and community. When you saw those meatballs sitting on the table, you knew you were home, no matter whose church you were in.
Older than the pie and harder to find, sweet potato pudding was the dessert that came before anyone thought to put sweet potatoes in a crust. Raw sweet potatoes were grated by hand on a box grater, knuckles and all, then mixed with eggs, evaporated milk, sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla. The batter poured into a buttered dish and baked low and slow until the top caramelized into a dark, crackled skin and the inside set like custard. This preparation traced back to West African root vegetable cookery, where yams were grated and baked long before European contact. In the 30s and 40s, sweet potato pudding appeared at church homecomings, always made by the oldest women, the ones who remembered it from their own grandmothers. The grating was brutal work. When food processors arrived, the texture changed, smoother, less rustic, and the dish faded into sweet potato pie. The pudding died with the hands that grated it. Number 22, brains and eggs. Pork brains scrambled with eggs in a cast iron skillet. This was common across the rural Black South from Reconstruction through the 1970s. The brains came from the hog killing, soft and pale, soaked in salt water overnight, and then crumbled into beaten eggs the next morning or at supper time. The texture was creamy, almost custard-like, and the taste was mild enough that children ate it without knowing what it was. Most of them found out years later and wished they had not asked. The United States Department of Agriculture started issuing cholesterol warnings in the 1980s. A single serving of pork brains contained over 1,100% of the recommended daily intake. The dish did not survive that number. Rose Bran Canned pork brains stayed on store shelves in the Deep South into the 2000s, but hardly anybody was buying them. Number 20, Kush. Most people have never heard the word. Kush was yesterday's cornbread, crumbled into a skillet with a little bacon grease and fried until crispy on the outside. Some cookbooks added milk or buttermilk to the pan, turning it into a thick porridge. Others folded in diced onion. The Gullah Geechee version along the coast of South Carolina used crumbled cornbread with cane syrup and butter. Every version started with the same idea. Leftover cornbread was not waste. It was breakfast. In households where bread was baked every day and nothing was thrown out, Kush was the Monday morning answer to Sunday's extra pan. The name may trace back to couscous, carried from West Africa and adapted with the grains available here. By the 1970s, when sliced white bread and boxed cereal took over the morning table, Kush lost its reason to exist. Every recipe so far shares something in common. They required no trip to a store, no brand name, no packaging. Cracklings came from the hog you raised. Tomatoes came from the garden you kept. Poke grew in the ditch beside the road. Cornbread left over from last night became tomorrow's breakfast without anyone calling it a recipe. The entire system was built on what was already there, and that is exactly why the modern food industry had no use for it. You cannot sell a woman what she already grows, kills, preserves, and cooks from memory. The only way to replace her food was to make her children forget she ever knew how to make it. This is where the story reaches further back than the country itself. Number 18, brominated vegetable oil. This one hid in plain sight the additive that kept the citrus flavor from floating to the top in orange and lemon lime sodas. Those bright bottles were a fixture at the cookout and the church picnic, lined up in the cooler beside the sweet tea, and brominated vegetable oil was what kept them looking right. Most folks drinking them never knew the name, but bromine builds up in the body over time, and studies done with the National Institutes of Health found it could harm the heart and the thyroid at the levels people actually consumed. The evidence finally tipped the scale. On July 3rd, 2024, the FDA revoked the rule that had allowed brominated vegetable oil in food, ordering it out of the soda supply for good. An ingredient that had ridden along in our drinks for decades, doing its quiet job, was pulled the moment the science caught up with it. Number 21, oxtail and onion stew. Oxtails, onions, and water. 3 ingredients and 3 hours of patience. Oxtails were the cut nobody wanted except the people who knew what to do with them. In southern butcher shops, they cost less than 15 cents a pound through the 1950s. You browned them in a heavy pot, layered the onions around them, covered everything with water, and waited. The collagen broke down slowly, turning the broth into something almost sticky with richness. The meat melted without resistance. The onions disappeared into the liquid. A single pot served a family of 6 because the broth was so rich that a modest portion over rice was a full meal. Your grandmother did not call this a stew. She called it Sunday. It could not be rushed. That was the whole point. Number 20, sweet potato pancakes with sorghum. Leftover sweet potatoes from Sunday dinner almost always ended up on Tuesday's griddle, smashed into pancakes thick with sorghum syrup. The potatoes from Sunday got mashed cold with a fork, then mixed with a half cup of flour, 1 egg, and just enough buttermilk to loosen the batter. A small ladle poured the mix onto a hot, greased griddle, and the cakes came up orange-brown with crisp, lacy edges. The sorghum bottle sat on the table because it cost less than maple syrup and held more flavor in 1 spoon. Black families across the South kept a jug of sorghum on the shelf year-round, since 1 gallon could last from October planting to April plowing. The pancakes filled up a child fast, used food that would have gone bad by Wednesday, and tasted like dessert in the middle of a hard week. Number 6, fried catfish and hush puppies. Fresh catfish fillets sold for $1.80 a pound at the black-owned fish market in Memphis and Jackson in 1986, and a pound of fillets fed 4 hungry people on a Friday night. The fillets were patted dry with paper towels, soaked for 10 minutes in cold buttermilk, then dredged in seasoned yellow cornmeal with a heavy shake of black pepper, garlic powder, and paprika. The pieces dropped into a deep pool of hot vegetable oil, 3 minutes aside until the crust turned the color of an autumn leaf. The hush puppies came next, scoops of cornmeal batter studded with chopped onion, fried in the same oil until they puffed into golden balls. Served on a paper plate with a wedge of lemon, a spoonful of coleslaw, and a side of yellow mustard, the whole spread cost under $4 and tasted like the Mississippi River. Friday night fish fry was the weekly ritual that closed the working week. Number 7, red drink. Shutout of the White House Easter egg roll. By segregation, black families in Washington built their own celebration. By 1919, 55,000 people showed up at the National Zoo on Easter Monday, and the red punch they served traced the line back 400 years to West Africa. The original red drink was hibiscus-based. Enslaved people in the American colonies adapted the West African hibiscus tea tradition using local berries when the flowers were unavailable. The red color carried spiritual significance in West African cultures that survived the Middle Passage. Adrian Miller, the soul food historian, documented this journey in detail. By the 1920s and 1930s, commercial products like Kool-Aid and Big Red soda began replacing the homemade version. The hibiscus punch vanished. But here is what stayed in your culture: the insistence on red. Not any color, red. At black gatherings across America, the red drink endured even after nobody remembered why it had to be red. 4 centuries of cultural memory compressed into a color. The recipe is gone, but your instinct remains. In the churches where everybody brought a dish and nobody signed up for the same thing twice, ground beef cornbread pie disappeared first. Seasoned beef, browned with onion, sometimes green pepper, always garlic, spread across the bottom of a greased cast iron skillet, topped with a layer of canned corn, then a blanket of cornbread batter poured right over everything, baked until the top was golden and the edges bubbled where the meat juices seeped through the batter. The women who made it for the repast after a funeral knew it traveled well, held its temperature, and fed mourners without requiring plates that needed washing. A dozen different women could make it, and no 2 versions tasted alike, which was part of the charm. It cost almost nothing and comforted the way only cornbread and beef together can. Warm without being showy, filling without being fussy. Number 21, hog's head cheese. Not actually cheese, not even close. By 1965, the church fathers in Black Belt counties from Alabama to South Carolina were still making head cheese in the same back of the kitchen way their grandfathers had. A whole cleaned hog head went into a vinegar water bath with bay leaf, allspice, and a fistful of black pepper, and simmered for the better part of Saturday. The cooked meat was picked clean of bone, chopped, seasoned heavily, and poured back into its own broth in a loaf pan to set overnight. By Sunday, it was sliceable, tangy, peppery, and translucent at the edges. It came to the potluck as half-inch slabs on a glass plate next to the saltines. By 1985, a new generation refused to look at it. Number 17, ham bone and navy bean soup. Nothing went to waste in a household that understood hunger. When the ham was eaten down to the bone itself became the next 3 meals. a senior would drop that bone into a pot with a bag of dried navy beans soaked overnight, an onion, a couple of carrots, and enough water to cover everything by 2 inches. 3 hours of simmering and the beans turned creamy and the broth pulled every last bit of smoky flavor from that bone. A 1-pound bag of navy beans cost 59 cents in 1978 and fed a person for nearly a week. The ham bone was free, already paid for with Sunday dinner. This was arithmetic. This was survival, taught by mothers who never had the luxury of wasting a single thing. A retired Pullman porter in Chicago made this every winter from 1971 to 1983. He had moved north during the Great Migration and brought his mother's recipe from Alabama. Slow cooker arrived to pretend it had invented one-pot cooking. Your grandmother was already doing this with a Dutch oven and a gas flame set to medium-low. Potted chicken with rice meant bone-in chicken pieces, thighs and drumsticks, never breast, because breast meat goes dry and she didn't raise anyone who wasted money on dried chicken. Seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, browned in a little oil until the skin went gold, then set aside while diced onion and bell pepper softened in the same pot. The rice went in dry, stirred once in the drippings to coat every grain, then the chicken went back on top, and just enough water or broth poured over to cover. The lid went on, the heat dropped. 8 minutes in, and the kitchen smelled like Sunday. She learned this method from her own mother, who had learned it in a kitchen where measuring cups didn't exist, and the only instruction was to watch until it looked right. Nobody in that house asked what was for supper twice. That pot answered every question before you finished asking it. Stuffed bell peppers were Sunday afternoon food, made for the fellowship dinner after morning service when there was time for a dish requiring assembly. Large green peppers were halved or cut across the top and hollowed, the cavities filled with brown ground beef or pork, cooked white rice, diced onion, garlic, canned tomatoes, black pepper, and salt. The stuffed peppers went into a roasting pan with a little water in the bottom to steam, covered for the first 45 minutes, then uncovered to brown the tops. Green bell peppers were a reliable garden vegetable across the South, inexpensive and productive, and the dish made the most of a moderate amount of meat by extending it through rice. It was economical in the way that required real skill to execute well, and skill was never in short supply in those kitchens. The women who made it knew exactly when the pepper walls had softened enough without collapsing, and they learned that threshold by feel, not by timer. The particular seasoning balance they found has not been replicated.
Cornbread dressing had the power to hush a crowded room. Crumbly, golden, and rich with sage and broth, it was the dish everyone waited for. It started with leftover cornbread, dried and crumbled, then mixed with onions, celery, and whatever broth simmered on the stove that day. The smell rose thick and savory as it baked, the edges crisping just right. It carried the weight of care, a dish that took planning, patience, and heart. At church suppers, people lined up twice just to get another scoop. It was heavy with meaning, like Sunday itself, feeding body and spirit in equal measure. Each bite was tender but bold, soaked through with flavor and memory. The secret was always in the seasoning. Not just sage, but the way it was stirred by someone who knew exactly when it felt right. It was a dish that demanded respect, the kind that made silence fall between bites. Cornbread dressing was not made quickly. It was built layer by layer, like prayer. Even when the pan was scraped clean, the smell lingered, wrapping the room in something that felt a lot like gratitude.
You saw the punch bowl before you saw the food, cut crystal or pressed glass, borrowed from the same church mother every time, and inside a lake of pink or green with a melting island of sherbet floating on top. The recipe was ginger ale, fruit juice, and a half-gallon of sherbet, stirred just enough to fizz. Through the 1960s and 70s, this punch stood at every church function from Easter to homecoming, and children lined up for it before anything else. Lime sherbet made it green, raspberry made it pink, orange was the one nobody liked as much. The woman in charge guarded her station like a deaconess guarding the offering plate. Nobody added ice because the sherbet was the ice, and if someone dropped in cubes anyway, it became a scandal that lasted through Wednesday Bible study. By the 90s, 2-liter bottles replaced the crystal bowl, and the bowl went back to the cabinet where it sits next to the memory of the hands that polished it. Number 16, fried chicken feet, cleaned down to the bone, boiled until tender, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried in a skillet until the skin turned crisp and pulled tight. The meat was scarce, but the flavor was concentrated, and the gelatin in the joints made the whole thing slick and satisfying in a way that meatier cuts could not match. Chicken feet were free. When a family slaughtered a yard bird, the feet were the part nobody else wanted, and that made them available to the people who could not afford to be choosy. Children ate them like finger food, pulling the tiny bones apart with their teeth. Adults served them over rice with gravy made from the frying fat. Supermarket chickens today come without feet. The processing plants removed them on the line and shipped them overseas by the ton. The feet left black kitchens when they left the bird. Number 11, persimmon pudding. Wild persimmons grew across the South in small, bitter orange fruits that were inedible until the first frost softened them. Once ripe, they had a brief window before they rotted on the ground. The old cookbooks were precise. Pick after the frost, press the pulp through a sieve to remove the seeds, then mix it with flour, eggs, milk, and sugar into a thick batter. Baked low for over an hour, persimmon pudding came out dark and dense, somewhere between pumpkin pie and date cake. It was seasonal in the truest sense, available for a few weeks in late fall and then gone. Nobody sold persimmon pulp in a store. The fruit could not be shipped or stored. When families stopped walking the fence line in November looking for ripe fruit, this pudding went with them. Number 22, saccharine. By the 1970s, it had become the standby in countless black kitchens. The little tablets dropped into coffee, and the powder stirred into pitchers of tea for anyone told to ease off the sugar. It was older than cyclamate and had outlasted it, the survivor of the artificial sweeteners. Then, in March of 1977, the FDA announced it intended to ban saccharin too, citing Canadian studies that found bladder cancer in male rats fed heavy doses. The outcry was immediate. Congress stepped in and saved the sweetener, but it did not let it off clean. Lawmakers signed the Saccharin Study and Labeling Act in November of 1977, forcing every package and product to carry a stark warning that it had caused cancer in lab animals. So the powder stayed on the table, but now it spoke a warning every time you reached for it. The sweetness our elders trusted came wrapped in a federal caution that followed it for decades. Number 20, fried corn and bacon. Fresh corn scraped off the cob, fried in bacon drippings, salted and served. 3 ingredients that tasted like August in the South. You cut the kernels from the ear, then scrape the cob with the back of the knife to get the milk, that starchy liquid that made everything creamy when it hit the hot fat. 2 strips of bacon fried first, pulled out and crumbled, and the corn went into the drippings until the edges browned. This was the dish that disappeared when families moved north and fresh corn came wrapped in plastic instead of pulled from the stalk. In the 1940s, a family with a garden and a hog had everything it needed from July through September. It cost nothing. A grandmother in Selma made this every summer evening and served it in the same bowl her mother had used. The bowl cracked in 1972. The recipe did not. Number 25, fried cornmeal mush with cane syrup. For most black families in 1960, the morning started with a pot of yesterday's mush sliced into squares. The rule was simple. Cook a heavy pot of cornmeal on Sunday night, pour it into a loaf pan, and let it set in the icebox until it was firm enough to slice. By Monday morning, a 1/4-inch slab hit the hot grease and crisped up dark brown on both sides. A spoon of cane syrup or molasses went over the top, and that was breakfast for a working man or a school child. Cornmeal sold for about 18 cents for a 5-pound sack in 1960, which meant a family could eat from that one bag for almost 2 weeks. Nothing got thrown away. The crumbs that fell off the cutting board went into the chicken bucket on the back porch. Number 14, Sunday smothered chicken over rice. Some Sundays in our 1980s, kitchen smelled exactly like this dish from the moment your feet hit the kitchen linoleum. The whole fryer chicken cost $2.90 at the A&P in 1985, cut into 8 pieces by the butcher behind the counter who knew your grandmother by her first name. Each piece was patted dry with a paper towel, dusted in seasoned flour, heavy with paprika and black pepper, and dropped one at a time into a Dutch oven with a 1/4 inch of hot vegetable oil. The skin hissed and bubbled and turned the color of an October leaf. The smell that came off that pan was the smell of safety, the smell that told you Sunday dinner was real and the week was finally over. The browned pieces came out onto a plate. Half the oil was poured off. The remaining grease was loosened with 3 heaping spoons of flour, stirred into a roux the color of peanut butter. 2 cups of chicken broth went in slow, whisked until smooth, then a sliced yellow onion, a teaspoon of garlic powder, a pinch of thyme. The chicken pieces returned to the gravy. The lid went on. The whole pot simmered for 40 minutes on a low flame while the rice cooked in a separate pan and the greens finished on the back eye. The kitchen filled with steam that fogged up the window over the sink, the same window your grandmother had been looking out of for 30 years. A scoop of rice went onto the plate first. A piece of dark meat went on top. Gravy ladled over the rice until it pooled at the edge of the plate. A slice of hot water cornbread off to the side. The smell of paprika and onion and chicken fat hung in the kitchen until Monday morning. Sunday smothered chicken was the meal that proved a hard week ended in a soft place. The plate cost under $4 and tasted like a memory you could chew.
Maypop fruit mash turned the wild passion fruit of the American South into a rare dessert filled with tropical fragrance. Known as maypop for the sound of its hollow fruit when stepped on, this native vine produced aromatic yellow fruits that ripened in late summer. Enslaved foragers gathered the fruit, split the rinds, and scooped the bright pulp into a bowl with a drizzle of molasses or honey when such sweeteners were at hand. The result was a naturally tangy treat that needed no cooking and provided a burst of vitamins. The flavor, a cross between citrus and melon, delighted anyone lucky enough to taste it. Even after emancipation, rural families prized maypops for jellies and pies, and the plant remains a cherished wild edible across the Southeast. Maypop fruit mash preserves a memory of fleeting seasonal abundance and the creativity that transformed wild gifts into moments of celebration.
If you did not grow up in a household that made chitterling loaf, you have probably never heard of it, and that is why the people who remember it hold on so tightly. This was not the same as a steaming pot of chitlins on New Year's Day. Chitterling loaf was the cold version. Intestines boiled for hours, seasoned with vinegar, red pepper flakes, sage, and salt, then pressed into a loaf pan and waited until the natural gelatin set the whole thing solid. Sliced thin like cold cuts, it was served on bread or crackers with more vinegar and hot sauce. The texture was firm, slightly chewy, with a tang that hit the back of your throat. In the Carolinas and parts of Georgia, chitterlin loaf was a fixture at church homecomings where the older women still made it from memory. By the 1980s, the dish had nearly vanished. Younger generations never learned the pressing technique, and without the right hands, the loaf would not hold. It slipped away quietly, the way things do when the only people who knew how stopped showing up. Number 23, salmon croquette loaf. By 1966, a flat tin can of pink salmon cost about 45 cents at the country grocery, and that one can feed a whole pew of children at the fellowship hall. The church ladies mashed the pink salmon with its soft bones and skin still in, mixed in finely chopped sweet onion, 2 beaten eggs, a sleeve of crushed saltine crumbs, and yellow cornmeal. They patted the whole thing into a single shallow loaf pan and baked it at 375 degrees instead of frying 20 separate patties one by one. Cut into squares, drizzled with a thin flour and milk pan gravy, it stretched a single can across 30 paper plates. The leftover pieces went home in tin foil for Monday school lunches. After the price of canned salmon doubled in the late 1970s, the loaf disappeared and only the pricier pan-fried croquettes survived. Number 19, pinto beans and ham. A bag of dried pinto beans, a ham hock, an onion, water, salt. That was it. You soaked the beans overnight, dropped everything in a pot the next morning, and let it simmer for 3 or 4 hours until the beans turned creamy and the ham fell apart into shreds. The broth was smoky and thick enough to eat with a spoon. A 1-pound bag cost 49 cents in 1975 and made enough food for 5 days. The ham hock was left over from Sunday dinner, already paid for. A woman in Tupelo, Mississippi, named Hattie Banks, made pinto beans every Monday for 22 years. She said Monday beans gave the week a rhythm. She said a week without beans was a week without a backbone. The ritual of cooking, the smell filling a quiet house, the act of sitting down and eating something you made yourself. That was not poverty, that was living. Tomato gravy over rice was what happened on the nights when the money was thinner than the pot. A can of whole tomatoes crushed by hand, she never used a knife for that, dropped into bacon drippings with diced onion and a pinch of sugar to cut the acid, simmered until the tomatoes broke down into something thick and brick red and alive with fat. Spooned over a mound of white rice, done in 15 minutes, filling the plate like something that had taken all afternoon. What the rest of the country didn't understand was that this dish had roots older than anyone in that kitchen. Stewed tomatoes and rice traveled a direct line back to West African jollof traditions carried by enslaved people into the Gula Geechee coastal kitchens of South Carolina and Georgia and spread inland with every generation that moved. She never called it jollof, she called it supper. The taste was the same. Ambrosia was the dessert salad that appeared at every church homecoming table from about May through September, sitting at the edge between side dish and sweet. In its 1950s church form, it was layers of canned mandarin oranges, crushed pineapple, shredded coconut, miniature marshmallows, and sour cream folded through to bind everything into a cold, sweet, faintly tangy cloud. Ambrosia had begun as a luxury item in the 19th century South, made with fresh coconuts and oranges that only the prosperous could afford regularly. Canned goods democratized it entirely. By the 1940s, a can of mandarin oranges and a bag of coconut flakes made it accessible to every church kitchen. The women who brought it understood this history without needing to say it. What was once expensive was now theirs. The bowl was always empty before the other dishes. When the church ladies who brought it stopped coming, the ambrosia stopped too, replaced by nothing in particular.
Baked chicken with paprika and butter was the definition of simplicity done right. It was seasoned deeply, not just with spices, but with care, every piece rubbed and wrapped in foil before heading to church. As it baked, the skin turned bronze under the melted butter, crisping at the edges and tender at the bone. The smell alone could make a whole congregation hungry. There was nothing showy about it, no sauces, no tricks, just seasoning, butter, and faith that heat and patience would do the rest. When it came out of the foil, steam rose like a blessing, filling the room with warmth. It was one of those dishes that reminded everyone that good cooking did not need to be complicated. It just needed love and time. The taste was honest: smoky paprika, golden butter, and the memory of family kitchens where laughter mixed with the scent of supper. Some cooks added garlic or onion powder, others brushed honey across the top for a faint glaze, but all of them shared one truth: this chicken never failed. It brought people together, filled bellies, and softened even the hardest weeks. In a world that moved too fast, this dish reminded everyone that some things are worth slowing down for.
Neck bones braised over rice carried more flavor per penny than almost anything else on the table. Pork neck bones, small, bony, threaded with collagen, cost next to nothing in the 1940s because butchers called them waste. The bones went into a heavy pot with onion, garlic, a bay leaf, and water just to cover, then simmered 3 or 4 hours until the meat surrendered and the broth turned almost sticky from dissolved cartilage. The rice was cooked separately, always separately, never in the broth, because the grains needed to hold their shape. The bones were piled on top, the gravy ladled over, and the dish arrived at church in a pot heavy enough to need both hands. Eating them was its own skill. You worked around small bones with your teeth, pulled the meat in thin strips, and let the gravy soak into the rice. When boneless pork became cheap, nobody wanted to work that hard for supper anymore. Number 20, smothered potatoes and onions. Sliced potatoes layered with sliced onions in a cast iron skillet covered with a tight lid and cooked low and slow until everything went soft and the edges turned golden brown. Some cooks added a little bacon grease for flavor. Others threw in a few slices of stricoline. No cream, no cheese, no butter, just potatoes, onions, seasoning, and thyme. This was a full supper in sharecropper families across the Delta, and it stayed on tables in black neighborhoods in Chicago, Detroit, and Gary well into the 1980s. It disappeared because it was too simple for a world that learned to expect more from a plate. Restaurants could not sell it. Cookbooks could not dress it up. It fed people, but it did not impress anybody, and that turned out to be fatal. Here is something that does not get said enough. The one skillet supper was not a limitation. It was engineering. A woman with 6 children and a husband pulling second shift did not have time to wash 3 pots. She did not have the counter space for them. She did not have the fuel to keep 2 burners going all evening. The skillet was the answer to every constraint at once. 1 vessel, 1 burner, 1 cleanup. And the food that came out of it was not lesser food. It was concentrated food. Everything cooked together, flavors layered into each other, drippings became sauce, and nothing left that pan without purpose. The modern kitchen has a 6-burner range and a convection oven and a drawer full of specialty pans, and still cannot produce a meal with that kind of focused efficiency. The skillet was never the problem. The skillet was the solution. Now, back to the list. Number 23, poke salad. The plant grew wild along fence rows and ditches across the South, and in spring, when the pantry was at its emptiest, women went out with a bucket and picked the young leaves before they turned toxic. Poke salad had to be boiled 3 separate times. The water poured off between each boil because the mature plant is poisonous. The old cookbooks were specific about this. 3 waters, No shortcuts. After the third boil, the greens were fried in bacon grease with scrambled eggs. It was bitter, earthy, and free. The dish showed up in community cookbooks from East Tennessee to the Alabama Black Belt, always with the same warning about the 3 boils. Skip one and you would know it. Wild food foraging is trendy now, but for Black families in the rural South, it was Tuesday. Nobody called it foraging, they called it getting by. Number 24, sassafras root. This was the root that gave old homemade root beer its deep, woody bite, and it brewed the sassafras tea that simmered on stoves across the rural South every spring. Folks dug it from the woods, boiled the bark, and drank it as a tonic to thin the blood after a long winter. The smell of it filled kitchens from Appalachia down to the Gulf. Then researchers isolated saffron, the oil that gave sassafras its flavor, and fed it to lab animals. It caused liver cancer in the rats, and the agency moved fast. In 1960, the FDA banned saffron as a food additive, which pulled real sassafras out of root beer and bottled drinks for good. The tea hung on in country kitchens a while longer, traded hand to hand, but the commercial route was finished. A flavor that once meant springtime and homemade soda was struck from the food supply by federal order. Number 23, peach cobbler. A can of peaches, a cup of batter made from flour and sugar and milk, and butter melted in the baking dish. You poured the batter in first, spooned the peaches on top, and the batter rose around the fruit as it baked. A can of peaches cost 19 cents in 1955. The batter cost less than a dime. In the church basements of Black congregations across the South, peach cobbler appeared at every supper and every funeral repast. Church, women competed over their cobbler, whose crust was crispier, whose filling held together when you cut it. A woman's reputation could rise or fall on a single pan. That cobbler was not a dessert, it was a credential. The women who made the best ones never wrote the recipe down. They carried it in their hands. Number 18, Streako lean and red-eye gravy. Few breakfasts spoke louder about Black Southern survival than a thin slice of Streako lean with a pour of red-eye gravy on top. Streako lean was the cheap cousin of bacon, a piece of side meat with stripes of pink running through the fat. It cost half what bacon cost. In 1965, sometimes only 15 cents a pound at a country store. 2 slices went into a hot pan and curled up tight as they crisped, leaving a thin layer of brown drippings stuck to the bottom. A half cup of strong black coffee poured straight into that hot pan, and the brown bits lifted off the iron in seconds. That dark, salty pour was the red-eye gravy. It went over a split biscuit or a wedge of cornbread, and the streak of lean sat right on top. The flavor was bigger than the price, and most older folks today still remember the smell of coffee hitting that pan first thing in the morning. For many of us, that one pour of red-eye gravy is the closest thing our grandmothers ever left behind to a written recipe. Number 3, meatloaf. Number 3 on this list was the supper every grandmother stretched into Monday's lunchbox by Sunday night. 1 pound of ground chuck mixed in a wide bowl with a sleeve of crushed saltine crackers, a beaten egg, half a yellow onion chopped fine, a long squeeze of ketchup, a shake of Worcestershire, and salt and pepper. The mix patted into a loaf pan, topped with a thick streak of ketchup, baked at 350 for an hour until the top turned glossy and the edges pulled away from the pan. Sunday's hot supper, sliced into thick pink rectangles, served over mashed potatoes with brown gravy. Monday morning, 2 cold slices went between bread with mustard and wax paper into a metal lunch pail. Black grandmothers in Cleveland and Indianapolis bought the chuck on Saturday and built the whole week around that single loaf. Meatloaf was the dish that fed Sunday and Monday from the same pan. Number 3, gumbos or herbs. Every Holy Thursday in New Orleans, Leah Chase stood in the kitchen of Dookie Chase's restaurant at 2301 Orleans Avenue in the Trim and made gumbos of herbs. She did this for over 46 years straight. 9 different greens: collards, mustard greens, turnip greens, beet tops, cabbage, lettuce, watercress, spinach, carrot tops, mixed with smoked andouille, hot sausage, ham hock, chicken, and brisket. Superstition held that you would gain as many new friends in the coming year as there were greens in your gumbo, but you could never use an odd number. That was considered deeply unlucky. Leah insisted on 9 because her grandmother taught her 9. The dish was a collision of West African stew traditions and German Catholic Holy Thursday soup customs that met in Louisiana in the 1700s. Black Creole families in the Trim and 7th Ward neighborhoods adapted and enriched both. Leah Chase was called the Queen of Creole cuisine. Presidents, civil rights leaders, and people just like you came for this once-a-year dish. She served it until her death in June 2019 at age 96. After that, the gumbo continued, but the hands that made it legendary did not. Dirty rice earned its name from how it looked, flecked brown and gray from chopped chicken livers and gizzards stirred through every grain. And anyone from a Louisiana kitchen knew the dish by sight before they tasted it. The livers were sautéed fast until firm but still pink, then chopped fine alongside gizzards simmered tender for an hour. The Holy Trinity, onion, celery, bell pepper, went in next, diced small and cooked in rendered fat until soft. Cooked rice was folded in with green onion, garlic, cayenne, and a splash of Worcestershire nobody measured. By the 70s, dirty rice showed up at reunions, holiday tables, and Friday suppers alongside fried fish. It was never the centerpiece and did not need to be. It made everything else on the plate make sense, and the cook who got the seasoning right never had to ask if people liked it. The empty pot answered. Number 26, Souse loaf. Souse was the Saturday work that produced the Sunday platter. The church fathers boiled a whole hog head with the cheeks, ears, and snout in a covered pot of vinegar water, bay leaf, hot pepper, and salt for almost 5 hours. The meat fell off the bone, got chopped fine, and went back into the pot with its own gelatin. It set up overnight in bread loaf pans into a tangy, trembling block, streaked pink and white. Sliced thin onto saltines, it traveled to every potluck table in the rural Black South through 1967. By the 1980s, the hog heads were harder to source, and Souse left the fellowship hall for good. Number 22, butterbean succotash pot. Butter beans were the quiet backbone of Black Southern cooking. They were cheap. They kept for months dried, and they turned creamy when you cooked them low and slow. A senior would soak a cup of dried butter beans overnight, then simmer them the next day with corn cut off the cob, a piece of salt pork, onions, and a little water. 2 hours later, the beans had broken down into a thick, starchy stew that did not need a single other dish beside it. In the 1950s, a bag of dried butter beans cost 15 cents and fed a person for a week. The salt pork was often left over from another meal already paid for. A retired seamstress in Natchez, Mississippi, ate butterbean succotash 4 nights a week for 7 years. She grew the beans herself in a garden behind her house until her knees gave out in 1978. After that, she bought them dried from the corner store and never complained about the difference. The meal didn't change. Her body did. The pot didn't care. Franks and beans was a Tuesday night staple that nobody put on a menu but everybody ate. A package of frankfurters sliced on the diagonal, dropped into a pot of navy beans, that had soaked overnight or come out of a can if the week was rough, seasoned with onion, ketchup, mustard, and enough black pepper to make it mean something. The whole thing bubbled together in one pot for 10 minutes while cornbread crisped in the skillet alongside. It wasn't restaurant food, it wasn't church food. It was Monday's paycheck stretched to cover Thursday's table, and in African-American urban households from Chicago's South Side to Harlem's tenements, this combination fed families through the 1950s and 60s without requiring a single apology. You ate it fast and you ate it quiet. Second helpings were not guaranteed. The watermelon rind was what everyone threw away. In black households through the 1940s and 50s, it was what got cooked. The green outer skin was peeled off, and the white rind below, firm, nearly flavorless, went into a brine of cider vinegar, sugar, whole cloves, cinnamon sticks, and sometimes dried chili for heat. It simmered until translucent, then cooled in the brine overnight. What emerged was a condiment, sweet and tangy and faintly spiced, set in a bowl on the fellowship table next to the potato salad. West African foodways have preserved vegetables in acidic brine for centuries, a technique that crossed the Atlantic and found expression in Southern Black kitchens as the waste-nothing philosophy that necessity had made into an art. At peak summer, when watermelons came in by the armload from backyard gardens, the rind was never discarded. Only households that stopped keeping gardens stopped pickling the rinds. Those households went one by one, and the condiment bowl left the table with them.
Smothered pork chops were Sunday strength on a plate. Thick cuts of pork cooked slow in onion gravy until every bite fell apart at the touch of a fork. The grandmothers who made them did not rush anything, because flavor took time and love took patience. They browned the chops in cast-iron skillets that had seen decades of dinners, letting the sizzle mark the start of the feast. Then came the onions, sliced thin, fried golden, and stirred with broth and flour until the whole kitchen smelled like home. Those pans were never washed too hard, because that seasoning was history. By the time the chops were done, the gravy had turned deep and glossy, clinging to rice, biscuits, or whatever was served beside it. Folks lined up early at the church table for this dish, knowing it would be gone before the choir even finished their song. It was not fancy food, it was memory food, the kind that reminded you who raised you and how much care could live inside one skillet. Even now, if you ever smell that rich gravy cooking, it feels like stepping back into a kitchen where laughter and faith never ran out.
Half the children ran from it, and the other half pretended to. Liver and onions smothered in brown gravy divided the fellowship hall clean down the middle. The old folks lined up with purpose. The young ones found reasons to disappear. Calf liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to draw out the bitterness, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried in cast iron until the outside crisped and the center stayed soft. The onions went in after, cooked slow in the same pan until they collapsed into golden ribbons. The gravy was built from drippings, thickened with flour, stretched with broth until it turned dark and silky. In the 40s and 50s, doctors prescribed liver for anemia, and church mothers who served it believed they were feeding both body and spirit. The iron in one serving could carry a field worker through Monday. When health trends turned against organ meat in the 80s, liver left the table so fast it left a grease stain and a silence where the pan used to sit. Number 17, fried canned corned beef. A can of corned beef turned out onto a cutting board, sliced thick and fried in a skillet until the outside crisped and the salty inside stayed soft. Corned beef was a government commodity food distributed to low-income families throughout the 1950s and 1960s through the surplus food program. In black households across the South and in great migration cities from Chicago to Philadelphia, It was fried crisp and served with white rice or pressed between two slices of white bread with mustard. The can cost pennies. The supper took 10 minutes from pantry to plate. When commodity food programs shifted away from canned goods and fresh meat programs took their place, the canned corned beef disappeared from pantries, and the skillet supper it anchored went with it. 22. Leather breeches. Every fall across Appalachia and the Upper South, green beans were threaded onto long strings with a needle and hung from porch rafters or kitchen ceiling beams to dry in the air. They hung there for weeks, shriveling into tough, leathery strips that looked like nothing you would want to eat. The cookbooks called them leather breeches. When winter came, the dried beans were pulled down, soaked overnight, and simmered low with a ham hock or a piece of smoked side meat. After hours in the pot, they softened into something rich and deep with a concentrated flavor that fresh green beans could never match. The method came through the Caribbean and into the American South. Dehydration was preservation before refrigeration existed. The strings came down for good when chest freezers arrived. Number 19, raw unpasteurized milk. Before the refrigerated truck and the grocery dairy case, country families drank their milk straight from the cow and they let it sit and sour on purpose. That soured milk became clabber, thick and tangy, spooned up plain or stirred into cornbread and biscuits across the rural South. Real buttermilk came the same honest way. Raw milk was the foundation of half the baking in a poor kitchen, but unpasteurized milk can carry listeria, E. coli, and salmonella, and the sicknesses it caused were severe, sometimes deadly, especially in the young and the old. So the agency drew a hard line. In 1987, the FDA banned the sale of raw milk across state lines, requiring pasteurization for any milk shipped in interstate commerce. The clabber and the true buttermilk did not vanish, but the easy supply of raw milk that fed those traditions was cut off by federal rule, pushing a cornerstone of country cooking to the margins. Number 25, buttermilk and cornbread, crumble. This was the meal that closed the day. A glass of cold buttermilk, a square of leftover cornbread, broken into it with your fingers, a spoon to eat it like cereal. In black households across the rural South, this was supper. Not a side dish, not a snack, the meal. After a day of picking cotton or walking 2 miles to a church that had no fans, a grandmother crumbled cornbread into a jelly glass of buttermilk and ate it slow. The buttermilk was tangy enough to wake your mouth. The cornbread softened but did not dissolve. It cost almost nothing because the buttermilk came from the churn and the cornbread was already made. A woman in Albany, Georgia, told her granddaughter she had eaten this meal more than 1,000 times in her life. She never tired of it. That was not a meal. That was a relationship. Number 22, sunrise skillet grits with pan drippings. The Sunrise Kitchen in a 1960s soul food household ran on one rhythm, and grits with pan drippings was its first sound. Water went into the heavy pot before anyone else was awake. Once it rolled, a slow handful of stone, ground white grits got stirred in with a long wooden spoon, and the pot sat at the back of the stove for almost an hour. Right before plating, a tablespoon of bacon drippings from the coffee can on the counter went straight into the bowl. That spoonful turned a plain breakfast into something that tasted like the meat from the night before without costing 1 extra cent. The bowl came to the table with the rim of the spoon already buried, and most people did not look up until the bowl was clean. That spoonful of saved drippings is what we still call the soul of soul food, one quiet ingredient carrying the memory of every meal that came before it. Number 22, sausage gravy over biscuits. Inside every black household kitchen in the South Carolina Lowcountry sat a tube of cheap breakfast sausage and a sleeve of canned biscuits from the dollar store cooler. The sausage went into a hot, heavy skillet first, broken up with the back of a wooden spoon, browned until the edges caught and the fat ran clear. 3 heaping spoons of flour were stirred into the drippings to make a quick roux. Then evaporated milk and water were added slow, whisked steady until the gravy thickened into a slow pouring river. The Pillsbury biscuits popped open from the can with a satisfying smack, baked off in 10 minutes, split with a knife while still steaming. Gravy ladled over the open biscuit until it ran off the plate onto the napkin. This breakfast carried black grandfathers to the steel mill at 5 in the morning and church mothers to choir rehearsal at 6 in the evening. The whole pan cost under $2 in $1986 and fed 4 hungry working people. Sausage gravy was Southern luxury at Southern black prices. Number 21, pineapple upside down cake. The moment your grandmother flipped that cast iron skillet and the cake came out perfect, golden and glistening, the whole kitchen held its breath. Not a single pineapple ring out of place. That flip was the most dramatic moment of Easter dinner. Canned pineapple became widely available after the First World War when the Hawaiian Pineapple Company began marketing it aggressively. In 1925, they held a recipe contest that received 60,000 entries. 2,500 of them were for pineapple upside down cake. A can of pineapple rings cost about 25 cents in the 1940s. The cake required just one 10-inch cast iron skillet, which most black households already owned. Betty Cook, food columnist for the Afro-American newspaper, celebrated this cake in a 1955 column read by millions of black Americans. She called it gorgeous with its glistening top. As cast iron cooking declined and box mixes took over, the from scratch skillet version became rare. But if you grew up watching your grandmother hold her breath during that flip, you never forgot. You carry that moment with you. Smothered chicken with onion gravy turned the cheapest parts of the bird into something that made grown men go quiet at the table. In the 1970s, whole chickens cost less than $1 a pound, and your mother stretched one across Sunday dinner and Monday lunch. She seasoned thighs and legs with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged them in flour, and browned them in cast iron until the crust went deep gold. The chicken came out. Thick sliced onions went in, sizzling in the drippings until they collapsed into something sweet. Flour went back into the fat, stirred fast, then broth hit the pan in a rush of steam that fogged the windows. The chicken returned, the lid came down, and the whole thing simmered an hour until the meat slid off the bone. Spooned over white rice, the gravy soaked through every grain. You knew it was done when the smell changed from sharp to deep and round. Only the person at the stove could read that moment. Number 19, Sunday spaghetti red pan. Here's the choir feeder from the intro. In 1963, for under $2 in groceries, the women's auxiliary at most black churches in Memphis, Birmingham, and St. Louis could fill a whole choir of 40 voices off a single rectangular pan of Sunday spaghetti red. A box of Mueller's spaghetti, a can of Hunt's tomato sauce, 1 yellow onion, a half pound of cheap ground chuck, garlic powder, sugar, and a dusting of sharp cheddar across the top. The whole pan baked, covered in tin foil at 350 degrees while the sermon ran long. Pulled from the oven at the closing hymn, it served 40 paper plates with leftovers for the deacons. By the late 1970s, ground beef prices climbed and the dish migrated home. Number 25, tomato and okra pilau. This was a low-country meal that traveled from the rice fields of South Carolina into every kitchen where a black woman knew how to stretch $1. A can of tomatoes, a handful of okra, a cup of rice, a spoonful of bacon grease, salt, and water. 30 minutes later, you had a thick, savory pot that tasted like someone had been cooking all day. The bacon grease gave it a depth that had no right being in a meal that cost so little. In the 1960s, a retired domestic worker in Beaufort, South Carolina, named Viola Simmons, made this 3 nights a week on $6 a week for groceries. The whole pot cost less than 50 cents and fed her for 2 days. She told her pastor it was the only meal that made her kitchen smell the way her mother's house used to smell back when the family was still together. She wasn't trying to be a chef. She was trying to feel less alone. That was enough. Stewed neck bones and potatoes asked for. Almost nothing in the way of ingredients and delivered everything in the way of flavor. Pork neck bones, the cut the butcher once practically gave away, seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic, and a pinch of cayenne, browned in a Dutch oven until the exposed meat took color, then covered with water and a diced onion and left to simmer for 30 minutes until the bones began releasing their collagen into the broth. Cubed potatoes went in the last 15 minutes, soaking up the pork-rich liquid until they turned soft and silky and tasted of nothing that grew in the ground and everything that came from the pot. What the bones left behind wasn't just broth, it was a gelatinous, deeply flavored liquid that thickened as it cooled, and the neck bones themselves gave up their meat at the touch of a fork, falling in threads so tender you forgot the cut had once been considered waste. Canned salmon was the budget fish of the 1940s and 50s. The protein that stretching hands turned into something requiring apparent effort. The bones were mashed soft, the flesh mixed with cracker crumbs, a beaten egg, diced onion, mustard, black pepper, and mayonnaise to hold it together. Each patty pressed firm by hand, slid into a cast iron skillet with hot fat, brown gold on both sides. They came out tight on the outside, tender and flaky within. The cream peas came alongside, canned peas warmed in white sauce of butter, flour, and milk ladled over the croquettes so the plate arrived complete. This was church plate food, the kind that appeared when the budget was careful, but the presentation could not show it. In certain kitchens, the combination appeared so reliably that browning salmon and warm cream sauce became indistinguishable from Sunday itself. The National Council of Negro Women published versions of this recipe in church fundraiser cookbooks throughout the 1950s. The women who made it are gone. The dish went with them.
Chicken and dumplings were a comfort for the congregation, a stew that could stretch to feed however many people showed up. The broth simmered slow, thick with flour and flavor, while soft dumplings puffed up on top like little clouds. Every spoonful was a reminder that simplicity could still taste divine. It was always served from a big enamel pot, the kind that never stayed empty long. The chicken was tender, the dumplings tenderer, and the warmth endless. Grandmothers stood near the stove ladling out bowls with quiet smiles saying, "There's more in the back." It was food that didn't run out, not when love was cooking it. The broth was rich with time and care, deepened by whatever herbs grew in the yard or window box. The dumplings soaked up everything, fluffy yet hearty, made to satisfy both hunger and heartache. You could taste the faith in every bite, the belief that food, like kindness, multiplies when shared. On cold days, this dish healed. On good days, it celebrated. Either way, it fed more than just the body. It fed the soul.
Baked spaghetti was not the same as chicken spaghetti, and confusing the two could start a conversation you did not want to have. This version used ground beef browned with onion and garlic, stirred into tomato sauce, then layered with cooked noodles and topped with shredded cheddar. It baked until the cheese bubbled and the edges crisped dark. The dish lived between Italian food and soul food, belonging fully to neither, claimed entirely by the church. Through the 60s and 70s, it showed up at Wednesday night suppers and youth group dinners because a single pan fed 20 teenagers who would eat anything with melted cheese on top. The woman who brought it always cut it into squares, not scoops. That was the till that it was church spaghetti. The squares held their shape on a paper plate, and that mattered when you were eating standing up in a fellowship hall with no tables left. Number 21, hoe cake. Not a fancy cornbread, a flat cake of cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt, fried in lard on a hot skillet until the bottom turned golden brown and the top set firm enough to flip. The name came from field workers who cooked them on the flat blade of a garden hoe held over an open fire. By the 1950s, the hoe was gone, but the name stuck in black communities from the Carolinas to East Texas. Hoe cakes were supper when there was nothing else in the house. 2 or 3 of them stacked on a plate with a ladle of pot liquor from whatever greens had been cooked earlier that week. They cost almost nothing to make. A bag of cornmeal lasted weeks, and the lard was rendered at home. The technique was simple enough that children learned it young. Jiffy cornbread mix and store-bought dinner rolls pushed them out by the time the 1980s arrived, and the word hoe cake itself started to sound old-fashioned. Number 24, tomato gravy. Across rural Alabama, the Carolinas, and most of Mississippi, breakfast meant biscuits, and biscuits meant gravy. But the gravy in the oldest church cookbooks was not the white sausage gravy sold in cans today. It was tomato gravy, bacon drippings, a spoon of flour, and home canned tomatoes from the summer garden, cooked thick and tangy in a skillet, then poured over split biscuits still warm from the oven. The color was dark red, almost brick. It stained the plate. Families who put up their own tomatoes ate this 4 mornings a week from August through March because the jars held in the pantry without refrigeration. Children who grew up eating it can still describe the exact color. When instant gravy powder arrived in the 1960s, tomato gravy quietly disappeared from most Southern tables before going any further. For those who want more of these old recipes, the dishes covered on this channel, and many that have not been, all collected in one place, Big Mama's Soul Food Kitchen, at my website, thehungryhistorian.com. It will not come up again in this video. If you want it, it is there. Now, number 21, comfrey. In old Southern home medicine, this broad-leafed plant was a fixture, brewed into a bitter tea for coughs and stomach trouble, and laid as a poultice on sprains and broken skin. Country healers and grandmothers kept it growing by the back door, and its leaves sometimes found their way into the greens pot the way any wild green might. People trusted it because their mothers had trusted it. But comfrey carries pyrrolizidine alkaloids, compounds that quietly scar the liver and have been tied to cancer in study after study. The damage builds slow with no warning until it is far along. On July 6, 2001, the FDA acted to pull comfrey from every dietary supplement sold in the country, ending its long run as a kitchen cure. A remedy that had been handed down as wisdom for generations turned out to be poisoning the very organ it was meant to heal. Number 13, fried bologna and white bread. A thick slice of bologna fried in a skillet until the edges curled, laid between 2 slices of white bread with mustard. That was lunch for every black child whose mother worked a double shift. Bologna cost 39 cents a pound in the 1960s. White bread cost 20 cents a loaf. A pack of bologna fed a family of children for a week. They called it the poor man's steak, and in households where actual steak never appeared, the name was not a joke. You fried it in the same cast iron skillet that cooked everything else. A 10-year-old could make this meal alone at the stove, and many did, standing on a step stool to reach the burner. A child who ate a fried bologna sandwich at 4 in the afternoon did not go to bed hungry. That mattered more than nutrition labels. Number 15, souse meat on saltine crackers. Souse, also called hog head cheese, was the breakfast meat of working people who could not afford bacon. A hog's head got simmered for hours with vinegar, peppers, and salt. Then the cooked meat was packed tight into a loaf pan and chilled until it sliced like jelly. 2 cold slices on a stack of saltine crackers made a breakfast that was salty, tangy, and filling enough for a morning shift. A small loaf cost about 35 cents in a black neighborhood grocery, and it lasted 4 to 5 mornings if the family was careful with the slicing. Number 12, oxtails over rice. Long before oxtails became a delicacy on a white tablecloth menu, the cut sat in the back of the meat case at the black-owned grocery store for under $2 a pound. Black grandmothers in Brooklyn and Newark knew exactly what to do with the bony segments most other shoppers passed over. The pieces were rinsed, patted dry, and seared brown in hot bacon grease, then dropped into a heavy pot with chopped onion, garlic, bay leaves, and water enough to cover by 2 inches. 4 hours of slow simmering pulled the gelatin out of the bone and turned the broth into something thick enough to coat the back of a spoon. A splash of browning sauce gave the gravy its mahogany color. Served over a mound of hot white rice with butter beans on the side, the meal stretched 2 pounds of bone into supper for 6. Oxtails were the cut the world had not yet learned to charge for. Number 6, whole country ham. This was the centerpiece of your Easter table. Not a supermarket spiral ham. A whole bone in country ham, salt and sugar cured over the winter months. 12 to 15 pounds, scored in a diamond crosshatch pattern and studded with whole cloves. That tradition was passed down orally through generations of black women. But here's the history that sits underneath every Easter ham. For enslaved people, ham carried a painful irony. They did the curing work, they smoked the meat, they scored the fat, and they ate the scraps, feet, jowls, hocks. The prime cuts went to the enslaver's table. After emancipation, the first generation of free black families serving their own whole ham at Easter was an act of reclamation. Not just food, dignity at your own table. Abby Fisher, born enslaved in Alabama, published ham preparation methods in her 1881 cookbook, Carried from the Plantation Kitchen. A whole country ham cost 65 cents per pound in the 1940s. By 2025, authentic country ham runs $8 to $12 per pound. A 15-pound ham that once cost your family under $10 now costs $120 to $180. The price locked most families out, the meaning stayed. Turkey. Wings were the working family's answer to a roast nobody could afford on a Tuesday. In the 1970s, turkey parts sold for less than chicken, and a pack of wings fed 4 for under $2. Seasoned with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and smoked paprika, the wings were seared until the skin blistered, then braised in a deep pan with sliced onions and gravy built from drippings, flour, broth, Worcestershire, bay leaf. 2 hours at 325, and they came out falling apart, the meat pulling from bone in long shreds, the gravy dark as coffee. Served over rice with greens, the plate looked like it cost 10 times what it did. That transformation, cheap to grand, ordinary to Sunday worthy, was the genius of black home cooking. Your aunt made them every holiday. She said the secret was the sear, burning the skin at the edge on purpose. After she passed, 3 cousins tried. None got the gravy dark enough. Number 28, ambrosia with sour cream. The 1960s church version had nothing to do with the airy whipped cream ambrosia that took over by the 1990s. The Sunday school teachers drained 2 cans of Dolly pineapple chunks, 1 jar of maraschino cherries, and a tin of mandarin oranges into a yellow Pyrex bowl. They folded in sweetened baker's coconut and a generous cup of Daisy sour cream, then chilled it overnight in the icebox. Some women added halved pecans from a backyard tree. It came to the fellowship hall in the same Pyrex it was made in, wrapped in a clean dish towel. Spooned next to ham, it cut the salt with something cold and tangy and faintly tropical. By 1978, the sour cream was gone, replaced by Cool Whip, and the old version was lost. Number 21, smothered chicken and gravy. This was the meal a church mother invented because she had 1 pot, 1 burner, and not enough strength to stand at the stove for an hour. Leg quarters at 29 cents a pound, seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic powder. Browned in bacon grease, then flour stirred into the drippings to make a roux. Water went in and the whole thing simmered, covered for 45 minutes until the chicken fell off the bone and the gravy turned thick enough to pour over rice. A widow named Dorothy Sims in Birmingham, Alabama, made this every Sunday for 11 years after 1974. She stretched a $2 package of leg quarters across 3 meals. She said it wasn't about the chicken. It was about sitting at the table on a Sunday and eating something warm she made with her own hands. That mattered. Mustard greens and pot liquor was one of those suppers where the broth was more important than anything solid in the pot. A piece of fatback or a smoked neck bone went into the pot first with water and onion, brought to a boil until the fat rendered and the water turned gold. Then a full mess of mustard greens, washed 3 times because grit in greens is a character flaw, stripped from their stems and torn, went in and cooked down hard for 15 to 20 minutes. Mustard greens cooked faster than collards, which was the whole point on a weeknight when nobody had time for a 2-hour simmer. The pot liquor that resulted was thick with minerals and fat and so deeply flavored that the real supper was what you drank, not what you chewed. You poured it over cornbread in a bowl, you sipped it straight. Some elders drank it as medicine, and they weren't wrong. Pot liquor carried iron, calcium, and vitamins that kept undernourished communities nourished when nothing else could. Corn pudding was the dish that separated the church cooks from the ones who were still learning. The base was simple enough: fresh corn cut from the cob, eggs, milk, butter, sugar, salt, and a little flour to stabilize the custard. It was the proportion and the technique that made the difference. How much egg to how much corn, whether the milk went in warm or cold, how long to bake it so the custard set creamy rather than rubbery. The corn itself mattered: fresh summer corn, cut close to the cob, the back of the blade run down each row to release the corn milk into the bowl. That corn milk, the starchy, sweet liquid from the cob, thickened the custard from inside in a way that dried or canned corn never could. The dish came out golden on top and trembling in the center, sliced and served warm alongside the stewed chicken at every major gathering through the 1940s and 50s. The women who made it understood corn milk. The ones who replaced them used cream corn from a can and wondered why it wasn't the same.
Candied yams were memory disguised as dessert, gleaming under syrup that caught the light like stained glass. They started as humble sweet potatoes, peeled and sliced by hand, then simmered with butter, sugar, and a whisper of cinnamon until they melted into themselves. Every forkful felt like Sunday comfort, the kind that lingered even after the plates were cleared. The smell filled every corner of the church hall, warm and familiar, bringing people back to childhood kitchens. There was something sacred about watching elders spoon them out with quiet pride. This dish did not need decoration. It already carried the glow of love. The yams were passed down like stories, like names, unchanged through generations because nothing about them needed fixing. When people said, "sweet," this is what they meant. The caramel syrup bubbled thick and glossy, coating every piece in warmth, the kind that stuck to memory long after taste faded. Sometimes a sprinkle of nutmeg or clove gave it a deeper note, but never too much. The sweetness spoke for itself. Candied yams did not rush. They took their time, slow and sure, like all things made with patience and heart. On church tables, their color alone brought smiles, that deep orange glow of comfort that meant home had arrived.
In the 1950s, a can of pink salmon cost 35 cents and stretched into enough croquettes to fill a platter for the whole congregation. The trick was leaving the bones in. You mashed them into the fish with a fork until they dissolved, and that was the calcium, though nobody called it that. The salmon was mixed with cracker crumbs, a beaten egg, diced onion, and enough black pepper to make your nose sting. The patties were shaped by hand and fried in cast iron until the crust turned copper brown and crackled under the spatula. The white gravy came from the same pan. Flour stirred into the leftover grease, milk poured slow, while the arm never stopped moving. These croquettes rode north with the Great Migration, tucked into church kitchens from Chicago to Detroit. A 35-cent can became a $10 memory nobody thought to write down. Number 18, fried sweet potatoes, not baked, not candied, not whipped into a casserole with marshmallows on top. Peeled, sliced into rounds about a quarter-inch thick, and fried in a cast iron skillet with lard until the natural sugars caramelized and the edges went dark and crisp. Some cooks dusted them with a little brown sugar and cinnamon. Others left them completely plain because the sweetness of the potato was enough on its own. Sweet potatoes grew wild across the South and were one of the cheapest crops a family could raise in a small garden plot. As a skillet supper, they were filling, fast, and required nothing but the potato and the fat to cook it in. Canned sweet potatoes and frozen fries replaced them in the 1980s. The fresh ones still grow, but the idea of frying them plain in a skillet for supper has all but vanished. Number 16, ash cake. Before there were ovens in most rural homes, there was fire. Ash cake was cornmeal dough shaped by hand, wrapped in dampened cabbage leaves or corn husks, and buried directly in the hot ashes of a hearth fire. It baked slowly from all sides. When it was pulled out and the leaves peeled away, the outside was dark and smoky, and the inside was dense and steaming. The method was ancient. Variations of it appear in cooking traditions across West Africa, the Caribbean, and the American South. The oldest plantation records mention ash cake as the primary bread of enslaved people before the 1830s. It required no pan, no oven, no fuel beyond the fire already burning for warmth. When cast iron became widely available after the Civil War, ash cake disappeared almost overnight. Number 23, sea turtle meat. Along the Gullah Geechee coast of the Carolinas and Georgia, turtle was once a Sunday food, stewed slow with onions, sherry, and dark roux into a soup that fed whole families. Green sea turtle was the prize, rich and almost beefy, and the recipes for it passed down through low country kitchens for generations. Coastal black communities had cooked it since slavery, turning a creature that washed up in the marsh into something worth gathering around. But the great sea turtles were vanishing, hunted toward the edge of extinction up and down both coasts. So Congress acted. The Endangered Species Act of 1973 made it illegal to take, sell, or serve any of the 6 sea turtle species in American waters, and turtle soup left the menu. Restaurants that had served it for 100 years quietly dropped it. A dish older than the recipes that named it was ended not by taste but by law. Number 7, molasses and biscuits. Flour, lard, and buttermilk pressed into dough, cut with the rim of a glass, and baked in a cast iron skillet, then split open and drowned. And blackstrap molasses. In the sharecropping South, molasses and biscuits was the sweet course that children waited for all day. The biscuits were made from the cheapest possible ingredients: flour at 5 cents a pound, lard rendered from the family hog, buttermilk from the churn. The molasses came in a tin that lasted a month and cost a dime. This was the only sweetness most sharecropper children tasted from January through October. No candy, no cake, no pie until the peaches came in. Just a hot biscuit split open with dark molasses pooling in the center like a small lake of something close to joy. A woman in Greenwood, Mississippi, named Odessa Carter made biscuits every morning of her adult life from 1931 to 1978. 47 years, same recipe, same skillet, same hands that knew the dough was right without measuring anything. She died at 83, and her granddaughter found the skillet still seasoned and ready. The biscuit stopped. The skillet did not forget. Number 24, 1 slab of fatback, 7 mornings. A single piece of fatback could feed a whole household for a week, and grandmothers in Mississippi and Alabama knew exactly how to make it last. They would buy 1 thick slab on Saturday for around 20 cents a pound, then score it across the top with a paring knife so the salt would render down slow. Monday morning, 2 slices went into the cold skillet. Those slices crisped up and gave back nearly a cup of clear, golden grease that flavored everything else that hit the pan that week. The skillet never got washed. The leftover grease became the cooking fat for Tuesday's eggs, Wednesday's grits, Thursday's potatoes, and Friday's hoe cakes. By Sunday, the original slab was almost gone, but the flavor had touched every plate that came through the kitchen. 1 pig and a careful hand could carry a family from one paycheck to the next, and almost no one threw away the brown bits stuck to the bottom of the pan. Number 20, red beans and rice. Pour the dry red beans into a heavy pot Monday night, cover them in cold water, and soak them through until morning, and you had the foundation of Tuesday's supper in every Louisiana black household. Tuesday was wash day, and red beans needed almost no watching while sheets and work shirts hung on the line out back. A smoked turkey neck, a cut-up yellow onion, 2 cloves of garlic, a bay leaf, a shake of Tony Chachere's, and fresh water to cover. The pot simmered low for 4 hours while everything else got done around the house. The beans broke down into their own thick gravy, served over hot white rice with a square of cornbread on the side and a splash of vinegar pepper sauce on top. It fed 5 working people for under $2.50 in 1984 dollars. Red beans were the Tuesday tradition that crossed state lines through the Great Migration. Number 19, tea cakes. Before there were Cadbury, eggs, and Peeps, black children on Easter morning found baskets filled with their grandmother's tea cakes, lightly sweet cookies made from butter, sugar, flour, eggs, and vanilla. A single batch yielded 3 to 4 dozen. The total ingredient cost during the Depression was under $1. Tea cakes were created by enslaved cooks trying to replicate the English tea cakes they baked for plantation owners. After emancipation, the recipe became a staple in your family's kitchen. For Easter, grandmothers made large batches and filled children's baskets with them instead of store-bought candy. The cookies had a character you could not find in any store. Lightly crisp on the outside, cake-like crumb inside, sweetness so subtle it whispered instead of shouted. During the Great Migration, families carried the recipe north, but in the cities, tea cakes had to compete with commercially available Easter candy. By the 1980s and 1990s, most families had stopped making them. Author Elbert Mackey wrote an entire book dedicated to preserving tea cake stories, recognizing the tradition was disappearing. When the grandmothers died, the baskets went empty. Pig ear sandwiches were sold at juke joints, neighborhood bars, and roadside stands across the Black South, and the people who ate them did not apologize. The ears were cleaned, boiled for hours until the cartilage softened, then sliced thin and either pickled in spiced vinegar or deep fried until the edges went crisp. Served on white bread with hot sauce, mustard, and dill pickles. The sandwich had a texture nothing else matched. Crunchy where the fat rendered, tender where the meat pulled apart, tangy from the vinegar. The dish came from the nose-to-tail tradition that had fed Black families since slavery, when the ears, feet, and tails were the only cuts passed down to the quarters. At places like the original Cozy Corner in Memphis or Nameless stands in the Mississippi Delta, a pig ear sandwich and a cold drink was Saturday night. Today, those stands are mostly gone. The ears are still cheap, but the hands that slow cooked them have moved on. Number 30, tomato aspic salad. Nothing tells you 1965 was a different country, quite like a quivering red mold of tomato juice unmolded onto a glass plate at a Sunday potluck. The church mothers made it the night before, dissolving plain Knox gelatin into a saucepan of V8 and Worcestershire, folding in chopped celery, green pepper, and one diced hard-boiled egg. They poured the whole thing into a fluted ring mold borrowed from the women's auxiliary. By Sunday morning, it had set firm enough to slice. The fellowship hall ladies arranged it on a bed of iceberg with a dollop of Hellmann's in the center hole. It looked like jewelry. It tasted like cold seasoned tomato soup with a backbone. A staple from 1955 to about 1972, then it quietly vanished from the tables. Number 24, tripe and hominy stew. Most people today wouldn't touch tripe, but for Black seniors who grew up in the rural South, tripe was a gift. A pound of honeycomb tripe cost 29 cents in 1972. A can of hominy cost a dime. You cleaned the tripe, cut it into strips, and simmered it with the hominy, onions, garlic, a bay, leaf, and water. 4 hours turned the tripe tender and rich. The hominy swelled into a stew that stuck to your bones and didn't ask for anything else beside it. A retired hog farmer outside Macon, Georgia, ate this every Saturday for 9 years after his wife passed. He made it the way she taught him. He said the smell of it simmering was the closest thing he had to her being in the room. Nobody wrote it in a cookbook. It kept a man fed and whole when the house felt too empty to bear. Salmon croquettes were the one supper she could throw together between walking in the door and the 6 o'clock news signing off. A can of pink salmon, bones mashed right in for calcium because nothing left that bowl, mixed with a beaten egg, crushed saltines, diced onion, and a spoonful of yellow mustard, then shaped into patties and laid into a skillet of hot oil that popped the moment they hit. The trick was the leftover cold mashed potato she sometimes folded in as the binder when crackers ran short. A Depression-era substitution that Black home cooks carried north through the Great Migration and never bothered to explain to anyone who didn't already know. She flipped them once, just once, and the side was always creamed English peas from a can, warmed in the same skillet after the croquettes came out. The whole thing was on the table in 12 minutes. You could follow every step exactly and still produce something that tasted almost right, but never quite right, because the missing ingredient wasn't in the recipe. It was in the hands that made it. Southern potato salad was not just food, it was a test. Every woman at the fellowship table understood this, even if nobody said it out loud. The potatoes were boiled whole until just tender, then cooled, peeled, and cubed, never overcooked, because soft potato made runny salad, and runny salad was a judgment passed in silence. The dressing was mustard-based: mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, diced onion, celery, hard-boiled eggs, salt, and black pepper. None of them wrote it down. You learned it by watching the ratio, how long she held the mustard over the bowl before tilting the jar, what color the dressing turned when it was right. At church homecomings through the 1950s, bringing the potato salad meant accepting public evaluation. The women who had earned the right to bring it were known. The ones who tried before earning that right were also known. When the elder who made it right stopped coming, the salad everyone else brought was fine. It was never quite that.
It was not just dessert, it was testimony. Sweet potato casserole with pecan topping had a way of making its presence known long before you saw it. The smell filled every hallway, the buttery sweetness of roasted potatoes rising through the church basement like a hymn of its own. Every black grandmother who baked it knew what she was doing. It was a bridge between Sunday service and Sunday joy, between what you gave to God and what you gave to your neighbors. The recipe was never written down, but everyone knew the rhythm by heart. Mash the potatoes until smooth, stir in brown sugar and milk, top with pecans like jewels on a crown. Those nuts toasted golden under the oven's heat while the filling bubbled underneath, silky and rich. Children waited by the kitchen door, sneaking tastes when no one looked, knowing this was the kind of sweetness you could only find in a church kitchen. The casserole dish itself was often chipped and worn, carried from home to potluck year after year like an heirloom that refused to retire. It was made for comfort and company, not for show. And every time it landed on the long wooden tables covered in floral cloth, it said something words could not. That even through hard weeks and heavy hearts, there would always be enough sweetness to go around.
The dressing was never stuffed inside the bird. That was the first rule, and breaking it marked you as someone who did not grow up in these kitchens. Cornbread and giblet dressing was baked in a cast iron skillet, and the cornbread was made days before, dried on the counter until it crumbled between your fingers. The giblets, heart, liver, gizzard, neck were boiled in their own pot, chopped fine, and folded into the crumbs with sauteed onion, celery, sage, and enough broth to make the mixture wet but not soupy. The ratio was the whole secret, and nobody measured. You poured until it looked right, and if you had to ask what right looked like, you were not ready. Louisiana churches added rice. Mississippi left it out. The argument crossed state lines and never got settled. At Thanksgiving potlucks, the dressing arrived in the same pan, carried by the same woman, set in the same spot. When she stopped coming, someone tried to fill it. The pan never tasted the same. Eventually, the spot just stayed empty. Number 23, pan-fried Spam. Before Spam became an internet punchline, it was a pantry staple in working-class black kitchens from the 1940s through the 1980s. Sliced into rectangles a quarter-inch thick, fried in its own rendered fat until the edges turned crisp and dark brown, and the kitchen filled with that unmistakable salty, porky smell. Served with white rice and a generous pour of Louisiana hot sauce. Hormel introduced Spam in 1937, and the United States military made it famous during the Second World War, shipping millions of cans to soldiers overseas. After the war, it stayed in the South because it was shelf-stable, affordable, and it stretched. One 12-ounce can fed 3 people if you cut the slices thin enough and fried them right. The moment fresh meat prices dropped and home refrigerators got bigger, Spam lost its reason to sit on the pantry shelf, and the Skillet supper it anchored went with it. Jerusalem artichoke relish. The Jerusalem artichoke is not an artichoke, and has nothing to do with Jerusalem. It is a sunflower root native to this continent, and it grew wild across the South in thick patches along creek beds and open fields. Black families in rural Mississippi and Alabama dug them up in autumn and turned them into relish, peeled, chopped fine, mixed with onion and green peppers, packed in vinegar and sugar, and canned in mason jars. The relish was sharp and crunchy, served alongside roasted meat or on top of field peas. The recipes appeared in handwritten community cookbooks from small black churches in the Delta, passed around at church suppers, and preserved in collections that most libraries never cataloged. The tubers are still growing wild today. Nobody picks them anymore. Number 12, red dye number 3, the colorant known as erythrocene. This was the cherry bright shade that finished the icing on a celebration cake and tinted the frosting piped along the edge of a sheet cake for a church anniversary. It glowed in the maraschino cherries, dropped onto a holiday ham, and in the penny candy that filled a child's pocket after Sunday service. For decades, it did its job without a second thought. The easy red when red was what the table called for. Then the lab work caught up with it. High doses of red number 3 caused thyroid tumors in male rats, and under the Delaney clause, a color that caused cancer in animals could not stay in food. The agency finally moved. On January 15, 2025, the FDA revoked the authorization for red number 3 in food and ingested drugs, giving manufacturers until 2027 to scrub it out. Number 16, sweet potato and molasses. A sweet potato roasted in the ashes of a fire, split open and drizzled with blackstrap molasses. 2 ingredients that traced a straight line from West Africa to a sharecropper's hearth in Alabama. Enslaved people had grown sweet potatoes because the enslavers did not value them. The potatoes grew easily in southern soil and produced enough food to feed a family through winter. The molasses came from sugarcane, cooked low and slow until it turned thick and dark. A roasted sweet potato dressed with molasses was the dessert, the snack, and sometimes the entire supper for children in households where sugar was a luxury. A sweet potato cost less than a penny. A jar of molasses cost a nickel and lasted a month. For a child who ate this sitting on a porch step after dark, that sweet potato was the sweetest thing in the world. Not because of the sugar, because the work was done, the day was over, and someone had remembered to feed you.
Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house, and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Corned beef hash with a fried egg was the kind of hearty skillet meal families leaned on when they needed something filling that cooked fast. Corned beef crisped in the pan alongside diced potatoes, onions, and peppers until everything browned together in a savory, sizzling mixture. Then came the fried egg, placed on top with a soft, golden center that spilled gently into the hash with the first cut of a fork. The smell filled the house, earthy and rich, waking up appetites instantly. Kids liked mixing the egg into the potatoes, turning the whole plate into a warm, comforting mess. Adults liked how far a single can of corned beef could stretch. It was practical, reliable, and deeply satisfying, the kind of meal that kept everyone full and content. Even now, people crave that combination of crispy edges, soft potatoes, and rich egg because it tasted like weekend mornings, family chatter, and the simple goodness of skillet cooking.
Salmon croquettes were the Friday night constant in black kitchens across the South and every city the Great Migration touched. A can of pink salmon, bones left in and crushed into the mix for calcium, a trick passed down without ever hearing the word nutrition. The salmon was flaked with a fork, folded with cracker crumbs, egg, diced onion, and black pepper. Some cooks added hot sauce, others stirred in yellow mustard, and that difference was the line between one family's recipe and another's. The patties hit a cast iron skillet of shimmering Crisco, and the sizzle was the dinner bell. You heard it from the porch. Golden and crisp outside, warm and soft in the center, they came with grits or white rice. You could follow the recipe exactly today, but without her standing over that skillet in her housecoat, flipping them with a fork she never washed between batches, they will never taste the same. Number 27, liver pudding. Up through about 1968, a slab of cold liver pudding showed up on every Carolina church potluck table, sliced thick and laid out on saltines with hot sauce. The deacons made it from pork liver, head meat, cornmeal, sage, and black pepper, cooked down in a tall stock pot for half a Saturday, then poured into loaf pans to set in the spring house. A pound cost about 30 cents at the country market. The young ushers ate it cold straight off the cracker. The elders fried it in slices. After integration brought new grocery brands into the South, store liverwurst quietly replaced it. The home recipe walked out with the women who knew it. Number 11, turnip green stew with salt pork. Turnip. Greens were the greens you ate when you couldn't afford collards. They grew faster, they grew wilder, and in many parts of the rural South, they grew for free along the edges of fields and ditches. A senior would wash a mess of turnip greens, chop them rough, and put them in a pot with a piece of salt pork, an onion, a splash of vinegar, and enough water to cover the greens by an inch. 2 hours of simmering turned them tender, and the broth, what people call pot liquor, was so rich in nutrients that doctors in the 1940s told patients to drink it like medicine. A retired midwife in rural Georgia picked turnip greens from the roadside every week until she was 79. She said the greens along Highway 41 were sweeter than anything in a store. A piece of salt pork cost 20 cents. The greens cost nothing. That pot liquor alone could sustain a person on a day when eating a full meal felt like too much effort. That is what made these meals so important for seniors living alone. Sometimes you didn't have the energy to cook and eat and clean up, but you could drink a cup of pot liquor and get through the afternoon. Chicken and rice with onion gravy was the dish that made a Tuesday feel like Sunday without asking anything extra of the week. Bone-in chicken thighs, browned in a cast iron skillet until the skin blistered, removed while thick sliced onions went into the drippings and cooked until they softened and went translucent and sweet. Then a splash of broth and a spoon of flour stirred in to thicken everything into gravy. The raw rice went in dry, stirred into the gravy so every grain turned tan. Then the chicken pieces laid back on top, a lid put on, and the whole thing left to steam over low heat for 15 minutes. What came out was rice saturated all the way through with chicken fat and onion gravy, the chicken fall apart tender and releasing whatever was left in the bone right into the pot. It was a Sunday caliber dish made on a Tuesday by a woman who understood that the technique was the recipe, not the clock. She is gone. The dish survives her, though it never tastes quite the same. Tomato sandwiches celebrated summer's abundance when gardens produced more ripe tomatoes than families could eat fresh. Thick slices of red tomato were layered between bread, spread with mayonnaise, and sprinkled with salt and pepper. The juice soaked into bread, creating a messy but deeply satisfying lunch that tasted like summer itself. Families ate these constantly during tomato season, knowing fresh abundance would disappear with the first frost. The simplicity was the point because perfectly ripe tomatoes needed nothing more than bread and salt to become memorable. Children helped pick tomatoes and learned to appreciate how gardens could feed families. These sandwiches couldn't travel far because juice made bread soggy, but eaten fresh, they represented everything good about growing your own food.
Peach cobbler with pie crust strips was the kind of dessert that reminded people what home felt like. You could smell it before you even made it through the church door, that mix of cinnamon, butter, and baked peaches rising through the air like a sweet hymn. Someone's grandmother had brought it from home, wrapped tight in foil and tucked safely in the trunk of her car, so it would still be warm when service ended. The peaches were always ripe, soft from syrup or from the summer heat, and they melted into the crust like gold under sunlight. The pie strips were laid carefully across the top, never in perfect lines but always with love, brushed with melted butter until they baked into crisp ribbons that cracked softly with every scoop. A bowl of peach cobbler was more than dessert. It was reward for long sermons, for tired weeks, for the kind of patience that came from faith and family. The sweetness clung to your tongue and made every bite feel earned. No matter how many tables were filled with cakes or puddings, this one was always gone first. The elders called it real dessert, and the children licked their spoons clean, knowing this was what happiness tasted like.
The smell of chicken and spaghetti casserole meant it was Fifth Sunday, and Fifth Sunday meant every woman in the congregation brought her best. This was not Italian food, this was church food. Spaghetti noodles broken in half, boiled soft, folded into a sauce made from canned soup and Velveeta, layered with shredded chicken and a can of Rotel tomatoes for heat. The dish came together in a 9x13 aluminum pan covered tight, and it traveled in the front seat like a passenger. Every church mother had her own version, and every version started an argument nobody settled. Some used mushroom soup, some used broth, and Sister Williams always put green bell peppers in hers, which half the deacons refused to touch. By the 1990s, fewer women had the time to break down a whole chicken for the filling, and the dish slipped off the table. The pan is still in the cabinet. The woman who filled it is not. Number 25, fried bologna, not deli sliced bologna on a sandwich. Thick cut rounds from the roll, scored around the edges so they would not curl, dropped into a skillet with a little grease until the outside blistered brown and the center puffed up like a dome. This was a Tuesday night supper in black households from Memphis to Mobile through the 1960s and 1970s. 2 slices per person, a piece of white bread underneath to catch the drippings, maybe a smear of yellow mustard if the jar was not empty. The whole thing cost less than $1 and took about 4 minutes to cook. Bologna was the cheapest protein at the corner store, and a cast iron skillet turned it into something that tasted better than it had any right to. Processed meat fell out of favor. Health columns shamed it. The children who grew up on fried bologna stopped buying it for their own kids, and the supper that held a household together on a lean night became something people were embarrassed to talk about. Molasses pulled candy. Sugar was expensive, molasses was not. The candy recipe that appeared most often in the old cookbooks was molasses pulled candy. Molasses boiled with a little vinegar and butter until it reached the hard, cracked stage, then pulled by hand while it cooled. Pulling was the work. 2 people stood across from each other, stretching the hot rope of candy until it turned from dark brown to pale gold. Children watched from the kitchen table. The pulling changed the texture from sticky to brittle, and when it cooled enough, it was cut into small pieces and wrapped in wax paper. The kitchen smelled like burnt sugar for the rest of the night. It was the only candy most rural Black children ever tasted outside of Christmas, and most of them remember the pulling more than the eating. Number 12. Number 13, absinthe and wormwood. The bitter green spirit and the wormwood herb behind it carried a fearsome reputation, blamed for madness and seizures in the drinkers who chased it. But wormwood itself had a quieter life in Southern folk medicine, brewed into bitter tonics meant to clear out worms and settle a sour stomach. The kind of harsh cure an elder pressed on a sick child, whether they liked the taste or not. The plant held thujone, a compound thought to attack the nervous system in large amounts. The fear ran so deep that the federal government banned absinthe outright in 1912, pulling the spirit and its wormwood from legal sale for nearly a century. The folk tonics lost their footing along with it. Decades later, the science softened and a reformulated absinthe was allowed back, but the long ban had already broken the chain. A bitter old remedy that grandmothers once forced down for its own good was outlawed for generations on the strength of a single feared ingredient. Number 10, sardines and crackers. A tin of sardines, a sleeve of saltine crackers, and hot sauce. That was Friday supper in Black households that could not afford fresh fish. A tin cost 10 cents in the 1950s. Crackers cost a nickel. You opened the tin on the kitchen table, laid the sardines across the crackers, shook hot sauce over the top, and ate with your fingers. No cooking, no pan, no stove, no dishes. For a woman who had worked all day cleaning someone else's house, that mattered. She could sit down and eat in 3 minutes. The sardines were salty and rich, and the crackers soaked up the oil from the tin. Children either loved them or refused to sit at the table because of the smell. But the women ate them, quietly, the way a woman eats when she is tired beyond description and still has children to put to bed. That tin was not a meal. It was permission to stop working for 10 minutes. Number 16, mush and molasses. The cheapest thing a sharecropper's wife could put on a plate in 1962 was a bowl of hot cornmeal mush with a spoon of dark molasses cut through the middle. The math told the whole story. Cornmeal at 18 cents for 5 pounds, molasses at 50 cents a quart, and 1 pot of water from the well. That bowl of breakfast worked out to less than 2 cents per serving, and it filled up a grown man until dinner. The mush got stirred slow for 15 minutes so it stayed smooth, then poured into a wide bowl while still steaming. The molasses sank down to the bottom in dark ribbons, and the spoon caught a little of both with every bite. Tenant farming families across Arkansas and Mississippi ate this 6 mornings a week for most of the decade. It was the food of people who counted every coin, but the warmth of it kept whole households going through the coldest months of the year. Number 2, cheese grits and eggs. By 6 in the morning in every Black Southern kitchen, the pot of yellow grits was already bubbling slow on the back burner with a heavy shake of salt and a knob of butter. A cup of quick grits cost under 30 cents and fed 4 working adults heading out the door. The grits cooked for 10 minutes until they turned creamy and thick. Then a heavy handful of grated cheddar melted into the pot off the heat and turned the whole batch the color of a sunset. 2 eggs, fried over easy in bacon grease, landed on top of a deep bowl of grits, the yolks broken with the side of a fork so the gold ran down into the cheese. A slice of cheap toast on the side mopped the bowl clean. Black grandfathers in Charleston and Savannah ate this breakfast standing at the counter before the first whistle. Cheese, grits, and eggs were the Southern fuel that started the workday. Fresh ground cornmeal from local mills gave 1970s cornbread a texture and flavor that commercial products have completely lost. Small mills throughout the South ground corn to order, produce a meal with the germ and oils intact, giving it sweetness and depth that degerminated versions lack. This cornmeal was alive with flavor, requiring refrigeration because its natural oils would turn rancid. Cornbread made from fresh meal had crumbly richness, golden color, and taste that made it more than just a side dish. Families knew which mills produced the best meal and would drive miles to get it, understanding that this single ingredient determined quality. As small mills closed and mass production took over, cornmeal became standardized, stripped of character for shelf life. The cornbread that once anchored soul food meals became ordinary. Number 20, red rice purlieu. The low country Gullah congregations brought a deep red rice purlieu to fellowship halls from Charleston up through coastal North Carolina well into 1968. The church matrons rendered diced country bacon in a wide cast aluminum pan, dropped in chopped onion and green pepper, stirred in a can of stewed tomatoes, then poured in a full pound of long grain rice and twice its volume in broth. It cooked covered on the back of the church stove until every grain was stained the color of a brick wall. Served from a deep enamel platter, it filled half a paper plate and any room around it. After the Great Migration thinned the older low country families, the home version of purlieu lost its place. Number 5, Hoppin' John. This meal was older than the country itself. Black-eyed peas and rice cooked in one pot with a piece of salt pork or a ham hock. The peas came from West Africa. The rice came from the low country plantations of South Carolina, where enslaved people grew it, harvested it, and rarely got to eat the good grains. They got the broken rice, the cracked pieces that couldn't be sold. They mixed those broken grains with black-eyed peas and scraps of pork and created a dish that fed millions for generations. A senior living alone in the 1970s could make Hoppin' John for less than 40 cents. A bag of dried black-eyed peas cost a quarter. Rice cost a dime. You soaked the peas overnight, cooked them with the pork and onion in a pot, and stirred in the rice at the end. A retired dock worker in Charleston made this every New Year's Day for good luck. But he also made it every other Tuesday because luck had nothing to do with why he needed a cheap meal. Hunger did. Sardines and hot rice was the supper that fed a family when the week had nothing left. A flat tin of sardines in tomato sauce, not oil, always tomato sauce, because the sauce was part of the dish, stirred directly into just cooked white rice with diced onion and a shake of hot sauce, heated 3 minutes until the fish broke apart into the grains. Done before the rice cooled. Canned sardines cost almost nothing, required no refrigeration, and delivered more protein per penny than nearly any other item on the grocery shelf, which is exactly why this Great Depression staple followed Black families north through the Great Migration without losing a step. Some households added a sliced hard-boiled egg on top. She added pepper and a prayer of thanks and called it ready. The kids ate every grain. Bean pie appeared on Northern church tables as a quiet act of self-determination. The dish, a custard pie made from cooked navy beans, sweetened with sugar, spiced with cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla, baked in a standard pie shell until set and golden, was developed within the Nation of Islam community in Detroit in the 1930s as an alternative to sweet potato pie. The navy bean was transformed through sweetening and spicing into something smooth, sweet, and confounding to anyone who hadn't been told what they were eating. By the 1950s, bean pie had crossed into broader Black church contexts in northern cities where the Nation of Islam's influence touched the surrounding community. The pie that started as an act of dietary principle became a dessert people looked forward to. Most of the kitchens that made it have been quiet for decades.
Baked macaroni and cheese was the crown jewel of every church supper, golden and bubbling beneath its crust. The noodles were cooked just enough, layered with sharp cheddar and evaporated milk in heavy pans that once belonged to someone's mother. No one used measurements, just instinct, passed down through taste and touch. When that oven door opened, the smell alone made people drift toward the kitchen. The cheese melted into a silky river, clinging to each noodle until it became more than a side dish. It was family history disguised as comfort food. Kids hovered close with their plates, hoping to get the corner pieces where the cheese crisped just right. Grandmothers guarded their recipes but always shared a serving, smiling at the next generation and saying, "Now this is how it's supposed to taste." On potluck Sundays, the pan came back scraped clean, proof that love and patience never wasted. It was food that reminded people of who they were and why the best things in life take a little time to bake.
A head of cabbage cost a dime in the 1950s and fed the entire deacon board. Smothered cabbage with smoked turkey wings was the quiet workhorse of the potluck. Never the star, always the first dish, scraped clean. The method was African at its root, the same slow braising of greens with smoked meat that West African cooks practiced for centuries. The cabbage was cut into thick wedges, never shredded, and layered with smoked turkey wings, onion, garlic, vinegar, and red pepper flakes. It cooked covered on low until the leaves went translucent and the turkey fell apart. The vinegar was the insider detail, just a capful added early to keep the cabbage from turning gray. Women who skipped it served dull, colorless cabbage, and the difference was visible from across the room. Bright, faintly golden meant the cook knew what she was doing. Gray sat, untouched. Number 15, skillet cabbage and bacon. A head of green cabbage cut into thick wedges. A few slices of bacon fried first to render the grease, then the cabbage laid into the hot fat with salt, black pepper, and a splash of apple cider vinegar, covered and cooked on low heat until the cabbage wilted down soft and picked up the smoke from the bacon. This was a full supper, not a side dish, in households where a head of cabbage cost a quarter and bacon ends were sold cheap by the pound at the butcher counter. It was fast, it was filling, and the whole house smelled like it for hours after the plate was empty. Bagged salad kits and pre-cut microwave vegetables made this kind of from-scratch cooking feel unnecessary. Those were 100 one-pot meals that Black grandmothers once made without thinking twice. If your family had a pot of something simmering on the stove every single evening, you know exactly what this list was about. Drop the name of the dish your grandmother made best in the comments. Subscribe if you want more of these memories brought back to life, and share this with someone who still cooks the old way.